To understand the Ork is to understand the greatest failure of galactic history, a weapon left on the table long after the war was lost. While the Imperium of Man views the greenskin menace as a barbaric, mindless tide of fungal flesh, the truth buried in the bedrock of the galaxy reveals a much more terrifying pedigree. The origins of the Ork species date back 60 million years to an era known as the War in Heaven. This was not a conflict of borders or resources in the way the Tau or the Imperium might fight today. It was a war for the very nature of reality, waged between the god-like Old Ones and the star-devouring Catan, who had allied themselves with the bitter, short-lived Necrontyr. The Old Ones were masters of the Immaterium, the first great psychics of the galaxy, capable of traversing the stars via the webway and seeding life across barren worlds. However, their mastery of the warp was countered by the Catan and their Necron servants, soulless machine warriors encased in living metal, wielding weaponry that dismantled the fundamental laws of physics. The Old Ones were losing. The Necrons, having shed their mortal flesh for immortal necrodermis, were relentless, and the warp was becoming turbulent due to the sheer scale of the psychic suffering unleashing across the stars. In their desperation, the Old Ones turned to their greatest talent, genetic engineering. They realized they could not win through attrition with their own numbers, so they began to manufacture warrior races. They created the Eldari to wield psychic energy as a weapon, and they created the Krork to serve as the physical anvil against the Necron hammer. The Krork were not merely big orcs. They were the apex of biological engineering, designed specifically to counter the Necron legions. While modern Imperial scholars speculate on this link, the evidence is irrefutable when looking at the biological imperatives hard-coded into the greenskin genome. The Krork were built to be self-sustaining, self-replicating biological weapons. The Old Ones removed the need for supply lines, arguably the greatest weakness of any standing army. By synthesizing animal and fungal DNA, they created a soldier that carried its own ecosystem. A Krork shed spores throughout its life, and even more violently upon death. These spores would settle in the soil, growing into the fungi that provided food, the squigs that served as livestock, and the lesser greenskin variants like Gretchen that handled logistics. A Krork army could land on a barren rock, fight a war, and the very act of dying would terraform the planet into a recruitment center and a supply depot. However, the Krork of the War in Heaven were significantly different from the Orks of the 41st millennium. The most chilling evidence of this disparity lies within the prismatic galleries of Solemnus, the tomb world of the Necron overlord Trazyn the Infinite. Trazyn, a collector of historical rarities, possesses a perfectly preserved specimen of a Krork, frozen in a hard light stasis field. This entity towers over the modern greenskin. While a powerful modern warboss might reach 3 or 4 meters in height, the Krork specimen stands nearly 12 meters tall. This puts it on a physical scale comparable to a Chaos Knight Titan or a Scout Titan of the Collegia Titanica, rather than an infantryman. The physical stature is only part of the difference. The armor worn by Trazyn's Krork specimen is not the scavenged, hammered together scrap metal characteristic of the current mechbo aesthetic. It is sophisticated, high-tech power armor, appearing more advanced than even the artificer suits worn by the Adeptus Astartes or the Custodian Guard. The craftsmanship implies a level of industrial capacity and technological understanding that the modern Ork simply does not possess. This Krork was not a barbarian, it was a super soldier. Its weaponry, too, was refined, immense, energy-shielded constructs designed to crack open the living metal of a Necron monolith. This suggests that the Krork were not just strong, they were intelligent, disciplined, and psychically potent on a level that allowed them to coordinate planetary assaults with tactical brilliance rather than just wave assault hysteria. The devolution from Krork to Ork is one of the great tragedies of Xeno's biology, though the Imperium would call it a mercy. Following the War in Heaven, the galaxy was left in ruins. The Catan were shattered or imprisoned, and the Necrons, realizing they could not sustain their rule against the rising psychic tide and the enslaver plagues, entered the Great Sleep, entombing themselves on their tomb worlds to wait out the eons. The Old Ones, the creators and masters of the Krork, effectively vanished, wiped out, or forced into hiding. This left the Krork without a command structure. The Krork were a weapon without a wielder. Designed to respond to the psychic commands of the Old Ones, and to fight a specific enemy of infinite power, they found themselves in a galaxy that was suddenly quiet. Without the brain boys to direct their aggression and maintain their genetic purity through psychic resonance, the complex biological coding of the Krork began to degrade. It is a prevailing theory among Xenos biologists within the Ordo Xenos that the Ork physiology is reactive. The Krork were 12 meters tall because they were fighting gods and star vampires. When those enemies disappeared, the biological imperative to maintain that mass and intellect receded. Over millions of years, the Krork devolved. The sophisticated power armor was lost to time, replaced by crude imitations. The strategic brilliance that could outmaneuver a Necron Ferom faded into simple cunning and brutality. They became the Orks, smaller, stupider, and infinitely more anarchic. Yet echoes of their former glory remain. During the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium, the Imperium encountered the Beast, a warboss of such immense power that he and his lieutenants grew to the size of Scout Titans and spoke High Gothic with perfect fluency. The Beast's forces utilized weaponized moons and gravity manipulation technology. This suggests that the potential to become Krork is still dormant within the Ork DNA, merely waiting for a conflict intense enough, or a WAAAGH energy field potent enough, to trigger the metamorphosis back to their ancestral state. The relationship between the Orks and the Eldari provides another layer of context to this devolution. In the wake of the war in heaven, with the Necrons asleep and the Old Ones gone, the Eldari rose to become the dominant power in the galaxy. For millions of years, the Eldar Empire spanned the stars, unrivaled in its psychic mastery and technology. They viewed the remaining Krork not as a rival civilization, but as a biological hazard, a weed left over from a forgotten war that needed to be pruned. The Eldari did not engage in conventional wars of conquest against the Greenskins during this epoch. They engaged in systematic culls. Utilizing their mastery of the webway, Eldari forces would strike at Ork infestations before they could reach critical mass. They assassinated rising warbosses, destroyed developing WAAAGH energies, and kept the Greenskin population fractured and primitive. This millions-of-year-long suppression campaign is the root of the instinctive animosity between the two races. Orks do not just hate the Eldar because they are pansies or physically frail. They hate them because of a genetic memory of oppression. The Old Ones programmed the Krork to recognize the Necrons as the enemy, but history taught the Orks to despise the Eldar. This dynamic prevented the Orks from rising again to Krork status. Whenever a WAAAGH grew too large, or a warboss showed signs of evolving into something more dangerous, something approaching the Beast or a true Krork, the Eldari would intervene and sever the head of the snake. It was only after the fall of the Eldar in the 30th millennium, when the birth of Slaanesh shattered their empire, that the Orks were finally released from this millions-of-year containment. Suddenly unchecked, the Greenskins exploded across the galaxy, filling the power vacuum left by the Eldari and leading to the rampant infestation the Imperium faces today. Despite their devolution, the most dangerous aspect of the Ork, the gift of the Old Ones, remains intact, their genetic blueprint. The Ork is not educated, it is assembled. An Ork requires no schools, no training academies, and no data stacks to learn how to wage war. All the knowledge they need is encoded directly into the double helix of their fungal algal DNA. This is the mechboy phenomenon. A mechboy does not learn engineering, he remembers it. When a mechboy looks at a pile of scrap metal, promethium tanks, and copper wiring, he does not see junk. His genetic programming unlocks, projecting a schematic into his mind that tells him exactly how to weld the pieces together to create a working energy weapon or a force field generator. He does not understand the mathematics of the magnetic containment field he just built. He just knows that, if you put the blue wire on the shiny bit, it zaps good. This is the legacy of the Krork. The Old Ones needed a soldier that could repair its own gear and build infrastructure deep behind enemy lines without needing a supply drop of blueprints. Consequently, every Ork spore contains the technical manual for the entire Krork civilization, fragmented and distributed across the population. This genetic knowledge extends beyond technology into social structure and medicine. The pain boys instinctively know Ork physiology. They know that an Ork's body is robust, capable of accepting crude bionics or having a head stapled back onto a different body with a high survival rate. They don't know why it works, only that it does. Similarly, the Runthords instinctively know how to breed and manage the Squigs and Gretchen. The hierarchy of might makes right is not a cultural choice. It is a biological safety mechanism designed to ensure that the strongest, and therefore the most fit to lead the WAAAGH, is always in command. This genetic memory is cumulative and reactive. The more Orks gather, the stronger the WAAAGH field becomes. This psychic resonance acts as a network, unlocking higher tiers of genetic knowledge. A small feral tribe of Orks might only know how to make choppas and sluggas, but as the tribe grows into a WAAAGH, the mech boys suddenly start remembering how to build trucks, then battle wagons, then def dreads. If the WAAAGH reaches a planetary scale, they instinctively begin constructing gargants, massive god engines that rival imperial titans. This escalation is automatic. It is the old one's failsafe. The more resistance the Orks encounter, the more advanced their technology becomes to meet the threat. The resilience of this system is terrifying. You cannot educate an Ork out of his nature, nor can you bomb them back to the Stone Age, because they carry the Iron Age, the Atomic Age, and the Space Age in their blood. A single spore surviving an exterminatus can restart the entire cycle. Within a few standard Terran years, that spore will grow into a fungus, which releases Squigs and Snotlings, followed by Gretchen and finally Orks. As the population swells, the odd boys, the mechs, the docks, the weird boys will spawn, and within a decade, a planet that was burned to a cinder will be hosting a fully industrialized Ork society capable of spaceflight. The tragedy of the Ork is that they are a broken tool. The old ones designed them to save the galaxy, but without the guidance of their creators, they are merely destroying it, one sector at a time. They are searching for the Great Green, a subconscious desire for the unity and purpose they held as Krork, but they can only express it through violence. They are the ultimate survivors, the only race in the 41st millennium that is truly having a good time, because war is not a tragedy to them. It is their biological function, their ecosystem, and their joy. They are fulfilling the only command left running in their degraded programming: fight, survive, and grow. The durability of the Orkide species is further cemented by the symbiotic nature of their existence. It is not merely a single species, but a self-contained biosphere. The Orkide fungal strain produces a hierarchy of organisms that serve every logistical need of an army on the march. The base of this pyramid is the humble mushroom and other subterranean fungi that break down biomass, be it local flora, fauna, or the corpses of the enemy, into nutrient-rich compost. This ensures that an Ork army never starves. They can eat the very fungus that grows from the pits where they were born. Above the fungi are the Squigs. These creatures are a marvel of biological adaptability, genetically malleable to an extreme degree. There are eating Squigs, which are little more than walking mouths of meat, oil Squigs, which excrete thick, fuel-like hydrocarbons used to lubricate machines, and even hair Squigs, which Orks attach to their heads to simulate the top knots and braids they believe confer status. The old ones essentially encoded the Krork's entire supply train into living, breathing creatures. A Krork soldier did not need to carry fuel canisters or rations. He simply bred the necessary Squig variant in the camp pens. Then come the Snotlings and Gretchen. These smaller greenskin subspecies possess a different set of instinctive behaviors. Snotlings are simple-minded cultivators, instinctively tending to the fungal gardens and herding Squigs. Gretchen are more intelligent, serving as menial laborers, scavengers, and assistants to the mech boys. They possess just enough cunning to handle tasks that an Ork finds boring or beneath him, such as loading ammunition, polishing armor, or serving as emergency rations when the Squigs run low. This caste system is rigid and genetically enforced. A Grot never grows into an Ork. He is born a Grot and dies a Grot. This ensures that the warrior caste, the Orks themselves, are never distracted by the mundane necessities of survival. This biological efficiency creates a terrifying momentum. When an Ork WAAAGH descends upon an imperial agri-world, they do not just conquer it, they infect it. The spores released by the invaders take root in the soil, outcompeting native flora with aggressive, fast-growing alien fungi. The local atmosphere begins to change as the fungal forests release dense clouds of spores. The water tables are contaminated with Orkide algae. Within months, the planet's biosphere is rewritten to support the Ork war machine. Even if the Imperial Guard repels the invasion, the planet is often doomed. The spores are microscopic and incredibly resilient, capable of lying dormant for decades. A cleansed world can suddenly erupt in a feral orc uprising generations later, triggered by a shift in season or a disturbance in the soil. The psychological makeup of the orc is the final component of the Old One's design. To ensure the Krork would never surrender to the Necrons, the Old Ones removed the capacity for fear and trauma in the way humans understand it. An orc feels pain, but he does not suffer from it. A severed limb is a source of amusement or annoyance, not an existential crisis. They possess no concept of defeat. As the common orc saying goes, orcs is never beaten. If we win, we win. If we die fighting, so it don't count. If we runs for it, we don't die neither. 'Cause we can come back for Anover go. See, this is not just bravado. It is a fundamental inability to process loss. This psychological immunity to morale shock made the Krork the perfect counter to the Necrons, whose terrifying skeletal appearance and Gauss weaponry were designed to break the spirits of mortal enemies. You cannot terrorize a creature that views a chain axe to the face as a good bit of fun. Furthermore, the WAAAGH energy field acts as a lubricant for reality, smoothing over the impossibilities of their existence. The Old Ones were masters of the warp, and they embedded a low-level, collective psychic field into the greenskin race. This field allows their crude technology to function more reliably than physics should allow. A gun with a jammed mechanism might still fire simply because the orc believes it will. A red vehicle moves faster because the collective belief of the orcs asserts that red ones go faster. This reality-bending effect is subtle in small groups, but becomes capable of altering the laws of physics during a massive WAAAGH. It is a crude, weaponized application of the same warp craft the Old Ones used to build the webway, stripped down to its most violent essential, the imposition of will over matter. This biological resilience is anchored in the fundamental composition of the orcoid anatomy, a miracle of bioengineering that renders the greenskin effectively immune to the trauma that would shatter a human or Eldari. To dissect an orc is to look into the engine of a tank made of meat. The Imperium's WAAAGHs have spent millennia studying captured specimens, often expressing a mix of revulsion and envious awe at the sheer durability of the creature. The orc is not a mammal in the standard sense. It is a symbiotic construct, a seamless fusion of animal flesh and fungal matter. This is not a parasitic relationship where a fungus infects a host, but a genetic integration at the cellular level. The animal cells provide the motor functions, the rapid movement, and the aggression, while the algal and fungal cells provide the structural integrity, the regenerative properties, and the metabolic efficiency. The green coloration of their skin is the most obvious manifestation of this symbiosis. It is not merely pigmentation, but a dense network of tough, algal cellular strands that permeate the dermis. This algae breaks down and repairs damaged tissue at a rate visible to the naked eye, while also providing a secondary source of nutrition through a crude form of photosynthesis. While an orc cannot survive on sunlight alone, they have voracious appetites for meat and fungus. This photosynthetic capability allows them to endure long periods of starvation that would kill a human guardsman. Furthermore, the fungal lattice acts as a natural armor. An orc skin is akin to cured leather or Kevlar weave, capable of turning aside small caliber rounds, shrapnel, and glancing blows from chain blades without the underlying organs suffering hydrostatic shock. Internally, the redundancy of the orcoid system is maddening to imperial tacticians. A human soldier relies on a centralized nervous system and specific vital organs. A shot to the heart or a severance of the spinal cord is fatal. The orc, by contrast, operates on a decentralized biological model. Their nervous system is not a delicate web, but a thick, insulated cabling of fungal fibers that is highly resistant to pain signals. When an orc loses an arm, the brain does not register debilitating agony. It registers a sudden lack of weight on one side and a vague annoyance. The blood vessels, containing a thick, dark red fluid rich in fungal spores and algae, instantly spasm and seal shut, preventing the catastrophic bleed-out that claims most battlefield casualties. This decentralized vitality means that lethal injuries are often treated as minor inconveniences. There are verified reports from the Armageddon campaigns of orcs continuing to fight with their chest cavities blown open, their rudimentary lungs exposed to the ash-choked air, simply because the brain had not yet realized the body was dead. The ultimate testament to this durability is the role of the pain boy or mad doc. In any other species, neurosurgery and limb reattachment require sterile environments and precision lasers. For orcs, it involves a rusted staple gun, a length of copper wire, and a heavy mallet. Because the orc body wants to be whole, the fungal cells will aggressively bond with whatever tissue they are pressed against. A pain boy can hack the leg off a dead orc and staple it onto a living patient, and within days the nerves will knit, the blood will flow, and the recipient will be stomping around, likely complaining that the new leg is a bit shorter than the old one. This regenerative capacity extends even to decapitation. If a warboss is beheaded, and a pain boy is quick enough to retrieve the head and stitch it back onto the body, the orc can survive. The brain shuts down into a spore-induced coma, preserving neural pathways until the vascular connections are re-established. This individual resilience is merely the micro-scale application of the orcoid survival strategy. The macro scale is driven by their reproductive cycle, which completely bypasses the need for gender, mating, or gestation periods. Orcs are sexless. They do not have reproductive organs in the mammalian sense. Instead, they represent the terminal stage of a fungal life cycle. Every orc, from the smallest grot to the mightiest warboss, constantly emits microscopic spores. These spores are shed from their skin like dandruff, released in their breath, and dwell in their blood. An orc is a walking biological weapon that contaminates the environment simply by existing. The release of spores intensifies during moments of high stress or physical trauma. When an orc is wounded, the adrenaline spike triggers a massive spore release. When an orc is killed, the body undergoes a rapid chemical breakdown that expels a final, dense cloud of reproductive material into the immediate vicinity. This creates a strategic nightmare for the Imperium. The act of killing an orc ensures the birth of more orcs. Incineration via promethium or melta weaponry is the only sure way to halt this cycle, as it destroys the spores before they can scatter. If an orc is killed by a bolter round or a chainsword, his corpse becomes a seed pod. The spores settle into the dark, damp crevices of the battlefield, under the mud, in the ruins of hab blocks, or in the shadow of dense foliage. Once the spore finds purchase in the soil, it begins to germinate, extending mycelial roots deep into the ground to draw up nutrients. This underground network is the foundation of the orcoid ecosystem. It does not immediately produce a warrior. The old ones designed the cycle to be self-sustaining, meaning the ecosystem must be built from the bottom up. The first organisms to emerge from the fungal cocoons are the squigs. These are simple, mouth-centric creatures that serve as the primary food source for the later stages. By the time the higher orcoid forms emerge, there is already a stable food supply running around biting things. Following the squigs, the cocoons spawn snotlings. These are the smallest and simplest of the greenskin intellects, possessing an instinctive affinity for cultivating fungus. They are the gardeners of the race, driven by genetic imperative to tend the subterranean mushroom patches and herd the squigs. Once the infrastructure of food and labor is established, the cocoons produce Gretchen. Larger and more cunning than snotlings, the Gretchen provide the logistical backbone, capable of handling tools, scavenging materials, and performing complex tasks. Finally, once the ecosystem is thriving with food, labor, and infrastructure, the largest cocoons swell and burst, birthing the orcs themselves. These youths emerge fully formed, muscular, and possessing the genetic knowledge to fight. A planetary invasion force can therefore be grown from a single spore in the span of a few standard Terran years. The resulting hierarchy is what Imperial scholars refer to as the orcoid food chain, a brutal but efficient caste system where biology dictates function. At the very bottom are the snotlings. Barely knee-high to human, they are little more than fungal pets. Their existence is one of constant peril, as they are frequently eaten by squigs or orcs when other rations run low. However, their role is critical. Without snotlings, the fungal food stocks would rot and the squig herds would scatter. They instinctively know which fungi are edible and which are poisonous, ensuring the WAAAGH does not poison itself. Above them are the Gretchen. Physically weaker than an average human, grots rely on a vicious, paranoid cunning to survive. In orc society, they serve as the domestic servant class. They clean the weapons, fetch the ammo, carry the loot, and serve as stress relief punching bags for their masters. While an orc is biologically hardwired for aggression and direct confrontation, a grot is hardwired for self-preservation and treachery. This makes them excellent snipers, artillery crew, and saboteurs, as they prefer to kill from a distance where they cannot be hit back. The relationship is abusive but symbiotic. The orcs provide protection from the galaxy's horrors, and the grots provide the manual dexterity and patience that orcs lack. An orc mechboy might have the genetic vision to build a deft dread, but it is the Gretchen who have the small fingers necessary to wire the control panel. Interwoven with these humanoid forms is the vast and diverse genus of the squig. The squig is the ultimate biological multi-tool. The old ones encoded the genetic potential for thousands of specialized variants within the orcoid spore. If an orc needs something, there is likely a squig for it. The most common is the edible squig, a soft, meaty ball of flesh with legs, but the specialization goes much further. Oil squigs excrete a thick, black lubricant used to grease vehicle tracks and gun mechanisms. Hair squigs are small, parasitic creatures with long, flowing tails that orcs attach to their bald scalps to simulate ponytails or top knots. The squig bites into the skin and feeds on the orc's blood while the orc gets a stylish mane. In combat, face biter squigs are used as attack dogs or thrown like grenades. Targeting squigs have a singular, massive eye and are wired into heavy weapons to assist with aiming. The medical field utilizes syringe squigs, which have needle-like proboscises used to inject venom or stimulants, and flesh-eater squigs that chew away necrotic tissue from wounds. The scale of squig evolution culminates in the squigoth, a monstrosity the size of an imperial tank or even a titan, bred to carry artillery pieces and transport squads of boys into battle. This biological diversity means an orc army is never truly cut off from supply. Their ammunition, their fuel, their food, and their medical supplies are all grown from the same spores that birthed the soldiers. The final, and perhaps most terrifying, aspect of orc biology is the direct correlation between conflict and physical growth. In humanity, a veteran soldier might gain scars and muscle definition, but he remains within the standard height and weight parameters of his species. In orcs, social status and combat success trigger a violent hormonal response that fundamentally alters their mass. This is the biological engine of the might makes right philosophy. When an orc fights and survives, his brain releases a chemical cocktail that stimulates the pituitary and thyroid equivalents in his physiology. His muscles become denser, his bones thicken to support the added weight, and his fungal skin darkens and hardens. An orc boy stands roughly the height of a human, though significantly broader. If that boy survives a dozen battles and kills a few rivals, he will physically grow to over 2 meters in height, transitioning into a knob. Knobs are the ruling elite of the tribe, hulking brutes who can crush a human skull with one hand. They claim the best loot, the best weapons, and the best armor because they are physically capable of taking it. This growth is theoretically limitless. If a knob continues to conquer, suppressing his rivals and leading successful raids, the WAAAGH energy and his own hormonal surges will push him into the warboss category. A warboss is a towering monster, often standing 3 to 4 meters tall, encased in mega armor that would crush a lesser being. The biological imperative here is command presence. The warboss must be the largest orc in the WAAAGH, because if he were smaller, a larger knob would instinctively challenge and kill him. This ensures that the leader of the orcs is always the most lethal combatant, maintaining the hierarchy through sheer kinetic potential. The most extreme example of this growth was seen during the War of the Beast, where the prime orcs grew to 10 meters in height, blurring the line between biological entity and siege engine. This growth mechanism also acts as a population control. In a stagnant orc society with no external enemies, the orcs will turn on each other. The constant infighting allows the strongest to grow while culling the weak, ensuring that when an external enemy does appear, the orc force is led by the absolute apex predators of their ecosystem. It is a system designed to prevent atrophy. Peace is biologically impossible for an orc because without conflict, their metabolism slows and they become lethargic and obese. War is not just their culture, it is their exercise, their growth hormone, and their reason for being. The interaction between this biological growth and the odd boy castes, the mechs, pain boys, and weird boys, adds another layer to the ecosystem. These specialists do not necessarily grow as large as the warbosses, as their genetic energy is diverted into the development of their specific skills. A mech boy's brain is constantly reconfiguring itself to understand complex mechanics, a process that burns tremendous caloric energy. A weird boy acts as a psychic lightning rod, channeling the raw energy of the WAAAGH through his mind. This often results in physical deformities or instability. Weird boys must be dragged into battle in copper chains to prevent their heads from exploding due to psychic pressure before they can unleash their green fire upon the enemy. The entire orkoid ecosystem is a closed loop of violence and regeneration. They land on a world, their spores infect the soil, the fungi grow, the food supply spawns, the laborers emerge, and finally the warriors rise to harvest the conflict. They fight, they grow, they die, and in dying, they seed the ground for the next generation. It is a perfect biological weapon that requires no maintenance, no supply lines, and no morale officers. It is a fire that burns across the galaxy, fueled by its own ashes. This biological immortality and closed-loop ecosystem are merely the physical vessel for the true horror of the Ork menace. While the fungal physiology explains their numbers and resilience, it does not explain how a species of anarchic barbarians can traverse the stars or construct energy weapons from rusted scrap. The answer lies in the metaphysical architecture, the old ones built into the greenskin genome, a phenomenon the Imperium's Ordo Xenos classifies as the WAAAGH field. This is not the refined, studious psychic manipulation practiced by the Eldari, nor is it the sole bargaining sorcery of chaos. It is a raw, brute force application of psychic energy generated not by a single mind, but by the collective subconscious of the entire horde. The Ork mind is a psychic resonator. Individually, an Ork has a negligible psychic signature, barely registering to a sanctioned imperial psyker. However, Orks are never truly alone. As they gather in groups, their psychic signatures begin to overlap and amplify one another. This generates a latent energy field known as the Gestalt consciousness. It is a background hum of pure, unadulterated aggression and confidence that pervades any area with a high concentration of greenskins. This field acts as a lubricant for reality, smoothing over the impossibilities of their existence and allowing their civilization to function despite its apparent violation of every known physical law. The most tangible manifestation of this field is found in Ork technology. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, a captured Ork Shuta is an affront to the machine god. When tech priests disassemble these weapons, they frequently find mechanisms that should be non-functional, firing pins that do not strike the primer, exhaust ports that vent into the magazine, or ammunition feeds that are physically too small for the shells they carry. By all logic, the weapon should explode or simply fail to fire. Yet in the hands of an Ork, it functions perfectly. This is because the Ork believes it will fire. The collective psychic pressure of the mob asserts a localized reality where the gun works, and the laws of physics are momentarily browbeaten into submission to accommodate that belief. This effect is not infinite. An Ork cannot pick up a rock and believe it is a grenade, but it allows machines held together by rusty bolts and baling wire to operate with the reliability of master-crafted imperial technology. This reality warping affects scales with the size of the horde. A small raiding party might only generate enough field energy to keep their engines running on low-quality fuel. A planetary WAAAGH, however, generates a psychic tidal wave that allows for the construction of gargants, massive, city-leveling Titan constructs that are often structurally unsound. An Imperial Titan is a marvel of engineering, balanced by gyroscopes and void shield generators. A gargant is a top-heavy mountain of scrap metal that should collapse under its own weight or topple over with the first step. It remains upright because millions of Orks are screaming their belief that it is the avatar of their gods, Gork and Mork. The WAAAGH energy literally holds the rivets in place and reinforces the structural integrity of the metal, acting as a psychic mortar. This collective belief system extends into the realm of color theory, creating one of the most bizarre yet consistent observable phenomena in Xenos warfare. Orks possess an instinctive, genetically coded understanding of color symbolism, and because they believe these colors carry power, the WAAAGH field makes it so. The most famous example is the axiom, "red ones go faster." Imperial logisticians have analyzed the top speeds of Ork vehicles, comparing those painted in standard scrap metal drab to those painted bright red by the evil Sunts clan. The data is statistically significant. Red Ork vehicles achieve velocities that their engine displacement and fuel mixtures cannot theoretically support. The red paint does not reduce drag or improve combustion chemically. The collective belief that red equals speed actually reduces the friction coefficient and boosts engine efficiency on a metaphysical level. This psychoplastic manipulation of reality applies to other colors as well, dictating the tactical doctrines of the various Ork clans. The Bad Moons clan, the wealthiest and most ostentatious of the greenskins, decorate their armor and weapons in bright yellow. In Ork culture, yellow signifies wealth and by extension more powerful explosions and higher rates of fire, more DACA. Consequently, yellow rockets tend to have larger blast radii, and yellow energy weapons overheat less frequently. The Death Skulls clan utilizes blue, a color Orks associate with luck and divine protection. A warrior smeared in blue war paint will survive glancing blows that should have penetrated his armor, or he will stumble upon a cache of high-quality loot in the middle of a barren wasteland simply because the universe tilts in his favor. Perhaps the most tactically dangerous application is the use of purple. While red, yellow, and blue rely on visible prowess, purple is the color of stealth. The Ork logic is impeccably simple. Have you ever seen a purple Ork? No, that's 'cause they're sneaky. This childish logic, when backed by the psychic weight of a commando squad, manifests as a terrifying camouflage. Orks wearing purple or painting their vehicles in purple hues become preternaturally difficult to spot. They do not become invisible in the optical sense, but the observer's eye tends to slide off them. Their footsteps are muffled beyond what their heavy boots should allow, and they can move through cover with a silence that rivals the Eldari Rangers. The WAAAGH field suppresses the sensory input of the enemy, effectively gaslighting reality into ignoring the 6-foot-tall fungoid berserker standing in the shadows. While every Ork contributes to this field, they are not all capable of manipulating it consciously. That burden falls to the weird boys, the unfortunate psychers of the Ork species. In human society, a psyker is a mutant who draws power from the warp. In Ork society, a weird boy acts as a lightning rod for the WAAAGH energy generated by the Orks around him. He does not need to draw from the immaterium, he draws from the mob. This makes weird boys uniquely dangerous and volatile. As the excitement of the battle grows and the Orks chant and stomp, the ambient psychic energy rises. The weird boy absorbs this energy like a sponge, his eyes glowing with green fire, his skin crackling with arcs of ectoplasmic lightning. This is rarely a pleasant experience for the weird boy. Unlike human librarians who train to control their power, the weird boy is a vessel that is constantly being overfilled. They are often seen twitching and gibbering, plagued by the constant roar of the WAAAGH echoing in their minds. If a weird boy absorbs too much energy without releasing it, he falls victim to the Eidbanger. This is exactly what it sounds like. The psychic pressure builds until the weird boy's head literally explodes, detonating with the force of a fragmentation grenade and unleashing a shockwave of raw warp energy that can liquefy nearby Orks. To prevent this, weird boys are often kept in isolation away from the main camp, or grounded using heavy copper staves and chains. The copper helps to conduct the excess psychic charge into the earth, preventing premature detonation. When a weird boy does unleash this energy in combat, it is devastating. They do not cast spells in the traditional sense. They vomit the raw aggression of the horde into the enemy ranks. A weird boy might manifest a giant, spectral green foot of Gork from the sky to crush a tank, or he might project a beam of pure WAAAGH energy that causes the brains of enemy soldiers to burst inside their helmets. More tactical applications include the jump, where the weird boy seizes a mob of boys and teleports them instantaneously across the battlefield, bypassing fortifications entirely. This is not precise science. They might materialize inside a wall or in mid-air, but to the Ork, the risk is part of the fun. The weird boy is a living weapon of mass destruction, guided only by the collective id of the army he serves. It is crucial to differentiate between the passive background psychic field and the event known as the WAAAGH. The field is always present where Orks gather, But the WAAAGH is a specific socio-political and psychic phenomenon that represents the apex of Ork civilization. It is a crusade, a migration, and a religious ecstasy rolled into one. A WAAAGH begins when a warboss rises to sufficient power to unite disparate tribes and clans. As he conquers rivals and absorbs their mobs, the WAAAGH energy reaches a critical mass. This is not merely a recruitment drive, it is a psychic beacon that ripples through the warp. When this threshold is crossed, the WAAAGH becomes self-sustaining. Orks in neighboring star systems, or even different sectors, begin to feel a restless agitation. They do not receive a radio transmission or a diplomatic envoy. They simply know that a great fight is brewing in a specific direction. This is the call of the WAAAGH. Millions of greenskins will spontaneously down tools, board their ramshackle ships, and set course for the source of the psychic disturbance. They are drawn like moths to a flame, compelled by a biological and spiritual imperative to join the fray. This is why Ork invasions seem to spiral out of control so quickly. The initial force acts as a gravity well, pulling in reinforcements from the void without any need for logistical coordination. The WAAAGH functions as a migration pattern. Orks are nomadic by nature, and a WAAAGH is the mechanism by which they colonize the galaxy. As the fleet moves from system to system, it grows larger, scavenging ships and technology from the worlds it burns. The psychic resonance of a full-scale WAAAGH is so potent that it can calm the turbulence of the warp around their fleet, creating a slipstream that allows their crude space hulks and rocks, essentially hollowed-out asteroids fitted with engines, to travel through the immaterium with surprising speed. They ride the wave of their own collective aggression. This energy also affects the warboss leading the campaign. A WAAAGH lord like WAAAGH is not just a big orc, he is a psychic avatar. The belief of billions of orcs flows into him, empowering him to feats of durability and strength that defy categorization. During the Second War for Armageddon, WAAAGH survived injuries that would have dismembered a dreadnought, fueled by the psychic feedback loop of his followers. The WAAAGH creates a figurehead who embodies the concept of invincibility, which in turn strengthens the WAAAGH, creating an escalating cycle of violence that can only be stopped by the total annihilation of the Ork force or the death of the supreme leader. The objective of a WAAAGH is fundamentally different from the crusades of the Imperium or the expansion spheres of the Tau. The Orks do not seek to hold territory for the sake of governance, taxation, or resource extraction in the traditional sense. They conquer to facilitate more fighting. A system consumed by a WAAAGH is turned into a production facility for war. Factories are converted to build ammunition, populations are enslaved to dig for scrap, and the planet is used as a staging ground for the next jump. Once the local enemies are dead or enslaved, the Orks get bored. The psychic tension drops, infighting begins, and the WAAAGH loses momentum, unless they find a new enemy. Thus, a WAAAGH must constantly move and consume, like a shark that dies if it stops swimming. This nomadic crusade is often guided by visions from Gork and Mork, interpreted by the Great Green's prophets. The destination is rarely strategic in a military sense. Orks will bypass undefended worlds to strike at the most heavily fortified fortress monasteries, simply because that's where the best fight is. This makes their movements unpredictable to imperial tacticians who rely on logic. You cannot cut off an Ork WAAAGH's supply lines because they bring their ecosystem with them. You cannot demoralize them because they enjoy the casualties. You cannot sue for peace because their definition of peace is the silence after everyone else is dead. The Great Green is how Weirdboys describe the Ork soul presence in the warp. While human souls are flickering candles in a hurricane, terrified of the demons that hunt them, the Ork soul sea is a roaring, boisterous ocean of green energy. It is so chaotic and aggressive that demons often avoid it. The Chaos Gods find little purchase in the Ork mind because Orks have no angst, no ambition for forbidden knowledge, and no fear of death. They are spiritually self-contained. When an Ork dies, his soul is believed to go to Gork and Mork to fight in the Great Green forever, or to be spat back out to have another go. This lack of spiritual vulnerability means that a WAAAGH is one of the few forces in the galaxy capable of plunging headlong into a warp rift or a demon world and emerging victorious, simply because they beat the demons into submission through sheer physical and psychic weight. The technological acceleration within a WAAAGH is the final piece of this terrifying puzzle. As the WAAAGH gains momentum, the latent genetic knowledge of the mech boys is unlocked at a rapid pace. In the early stages of a gathering, mechs might only build trucks and shooters. As the WAAAGH grows and the psychic field intensifies, the inspiration strikes them to build force field projectors, teleportation arrays, and subatomic weaponry like the shock attack gun. This weapon is a prime example of Ork ingenuity and cruelty, utilizing the warp to tunnel snotlings into the enemy's armor. The snotlings, driven mad by the brief exposure to the immaterium, materialize inside the victim's power armor or tank hull, tearing them apart from the inside. This level of sophisticated, weaponized teleportation technology is unlocked solely by the proximity of millions of other orks. It is a reactive evolution. The harder the fight, the smarter the mechs become, and the more deadly the WAAAGH becomes. The WAAAGH is therefore not just an army. It is a mobile, self-upgrading civilization powered by the collective psychosis of a fungus that thinks it is a god. It is a rolling apocalypse that laughs as it burns worlds, driven by a psychic imperative that is as old as the war in heaven. To the Ork, the galaxy is not a place of horror or tragedy. It is a playground, and the WAAAGH is the game. Every bullet fired, every explosion, and every drop of blood spilled feeds the field, strengthening the survivors and calling more greenskins from the void to join the eternal party. This psychic infrastructure serves as the bedrock for a society that, to the outside observer, appears to be total anarchy, yet functions with a rigid, brutal efficiency. While the WAAAGH field provides the metaphysical grease that keeps the gears turning, the physical engine of the Ork Empire is driven by a social hierarchy so simple it defies political corruption: the rule of size. In the 41st millennium, where the Imperium is strangled by a bureaucracy of hereditary governors, endless paperwork, and convoluted laws of succession, the Ork method of governance is refreshingly direct. Authority is not derived from lineage, votes, or divine mandate, but from mass, muscle density, and the ability to inflict violence upon subordinates. This meritocracy of violence begins the moment a youth, a young orc fresh from the cocoon, crawls out of the dirt. At this stage, he is indistinguishable from his peers, driven only by the instinct to find a weapon and join a mob. However, the biological feedback loop between aggression and growth quickly creates stratification. As the orc fights, he grows. The hierarchy is visually self-evident. A boy looks up to a knob not out of respect for rank, but because the knob is physically twice as wide, a head taller, and holding a choppa that could bisect the boy without slowing down. There is no concept of a Napoleon complex in Ork society. Small leaders simply do not exist because they are eaten or crushed by larger rivals before they can issue an order. The knobs serve as the ruling caste of the tribe, the aristocracy of the knuckles. They enforce the will of the warboss, mostly by kicking the boys into line or bashing their heads together until they stop squabbling and start shooting. A knob's authority is absolute as long as he can physically back it up. They claim the best spoils of war before the rest of the mob gets a look. If a shipment of Imperial lascannons is looted, the knobs take them. If a shiny piece of scrap metal is found, it becomes a knob's shoulder plate. This hoarding of resources further cements their power. They are not just bigger, they are better armored and better armed. It creates a cycle where the strong get stronger, and the weak scramble for the scraps, hoping to survive long enough to undergo a growth spurt of their own. At the apex of this pyramid stands the warboss. To lead a WAAAGH, an orc must be a monster of truly terrifying proportions. We are talking about a creature that can stand toe-to-toe with a dreadnought and treat it as a sparring partner. The warboss is the ultimate authority, the despot whose word is law because to disobey is immediate death. His primary method of governance is the crump. If a knob steps out of line or questions a tactical decision, such as the order to charge a minefield, the warboss does not debate. He simply strikes the dissenter with enough force to liquefy organs. If the knob survives, he falls back in line. If he dies, his gear is redistributed, and the hierarchy shifts slightly. This system ensures that the leader is always the most lethal combatant in the army, preventing the stagnation that occurs in human armies led by elderly generals safely tucked away in bunkers. However, sheer brute force creates a conundrum. A society run entirely by the biggest idiots would theoretically collapse because no one would know how to fix the engines or sew a limb back on. This is where the cast of the odd boys enters the equation, complicating the simple might makes right dynamic. The odd boys are genetically predisposed specialists who exist somewhat outside the standard vertical hierarchy. They are not necessarily the biggest orcs, but they possess the innate technical knowledge implanted by the old ones. They are tolerated and even protected by the warbosses and knobs because without them, the WAAAGH would grind to a halt. The most prominent of these are the mech boys, or mechs. These are the engineers, architects, and weaponsmiths of the greenskin race. In a camp full of warriors who only want to break things, the mech is driven by a compulsive need to build. Their workshops are chaotic temples of industry, filled with the deafening roar of grinders, the blinding flash of arc welders, and the panic squeals of Gretchen assistants. A mech boy does not need blueprints. His understanding of technology is instinctual. When a warboss wants a new battle wagon, he doesn't commission it. He drags a pile of looted Liman rust tanks and rhinos to the mech's workshop and demands something dead killy. The social standing of a mech is unique. A knob might be able to crush a mech's skull with one hand, but he won't. If he kills the mech, who will fix his custom shooter when it jams? Who will attach the circular saw to his bionic arm? This dependency gives the mech boys a significant amount of leverage. They charge exorbitant rates for their services, demanding the best loot and the most teeth in exchange for their work. Furthermore, mechs are dangerous in their own right. They are often heavily cybernetic, having replaced their own limbs with tools and weapons, and they are usually surrounded by their own creations, def dreads and killicans, which serve as personal bodyguards. A warboss treats a big mech not as a subordinate to be bullied, but as a valuable asset to be bribed and cajoled. Parallel to the mechs are the pain boys, also known as docs or mad docs. If the mech fixes the machines, the pain boy fixes the orcs. Given the orc propensity for getting blown up, shot, and dismembered, the pain boy is perhaps the busiest orc in the camp. Their understanding of anatomy is as crude as it is effective. An orc's surgery is a nightmare of rust and squalor. There is no anesthesia, only a heavy mallet to the forehead to induce unconsciousness, or simply strapping the patient down if the doc wants to hear him scream. Pain boys are viewed with a mixture of necessity and deep suspicion. Orcs are incredibly tough, but they are terrified of going to the doc, mostly because pain boys have a tendency to experiment. A boy might go in for a simple tooth extraction and wake up with a squig grafted to his shoulder or a mechanical lung that puffs black smoke, simply because the pain boy felt creative that day. Despite this, they are untouchable. When a knob gets his arm sliced off by a space marine power sword, he has no choice but to visit the doc. The pain boy will rummage through his bucket of spare parts, limbs scavenged from the battlefield, kept fresh in brine or oil, and staple a new one on. This transaction creates a weird social contract. The pain boy keeps the army fighting, and in return, the army allows the pain boy to indulge his sadistic curiosity. The most successful pain boys, like Mad Doc Grotznick, wield political power that rivals high-ranking knobs, simply because they hold the literal lives of the leadership cast in their blood-stained hands. Then there are the run-thirds, the slave drivers of orc society. While boys fight, someone has to handle the logistics of the underclasses. Run-thirds are genetically predisposed to have patience, a trait almost entirely absent in other orcs. They manage the hordes of Gretchen and snotlings, ensuring the fungus fields are harvested, the ammo crates are carried, and the squigs are fed. In the social hierarchy, they act as the interface between the warrior caste and the labor caste. A run-third is usually equipped with a grab-a-stick, a tool used to catch fleeing grots, and a squig hound to sniff out shirkers. They are essential for maintaining the economy of the tribe. Without run-thirds, the Gretchen would scatter or be eaten, the ammunition would never reach the front lines, and the WAAAGH would starve. They are the overseers of the supply chain, ensuring the mundane reality of logistics functions so the warboss can focus on the grand strategy of smashing things. Underpinning this entire social structure is the economic engine of the Ork Empire, the teeth. The Ork currency system is a stroke of accidental genius that prevents the economic stagnation plaguing other civilizations. In the Imperium, wealth can be hoarded for generations, creating a decadent nobility that contributes nothing to the war effort. In the Ork Empire, the currency is biodegradable. Orcs use the teeth of their own kind as money. Specifically, the large, jagged molars and canines that grow continuously in the greenskin jaw. This system solves the problem of inflation and wealth inequality through biology. Ork teeth rot. Once pulled from the gum, a tooth will degrade and crumble into calcium dust within a few standard Terran years. This forces an orc to spend his wealth. He cannot bury a chest of teeth and retire. He must trade them immediately for a better gun, a faster bike, or a ticket on a void ship. This ensures a high-velocity economy where resources are constantly circulating. A knob with a bag full of teeth goes to a mech to buy a custom shooter. The mech uses those teeth to buy scrap metal from a scavenger or food from a runthird. The runthird uses the teeth to buy protection from the knob. The wealth flows, driving the industrial output of the tribe. The acquisition of this currency is naturally violent. While orcs naturally shed and regrow teeth, this passive income is rarely enough to afford the good gubbins. To get rich, an orc has to knock the teeth out of someone else's head. This integrates the economy directly into the social hierarchy. A bigger orc can punch more teeth out of his rivals, making him richer. He uses that wealth to buy better gear, which makes him more lethal, allowing him to knock out even more teeth. It is a self-reinforcing cycle of violence and capitalism. The Bad Moon's clan is a biological anomaly in this system. Their teeth grow faster and larger than other clans. This makes them the merchant class of orc society, naturally wealthy and possessing the flashiest guns. However, it also makes them targets. Other clans, particularly the poverty-stricken Death Skulls, view a Bad Moon orc not just as a rival, but as a walking ATM to be smashed open. This economic model dictates the pace of orc life. A warboss organizes a raid not just for the thrill of battle, but to generate wealth. A raid on an imperial world yields loot, but the fighting itself generates the internal currency. After a battle, the tooth pulling is a ritualistic harvest. Grots scurry across the battlefield with pliers, extracting the currency from the dead. This wealth is then pumped back into the mech boys to repair the damage and build bigger weapons for the next fight. The constant competition for teeth and status leads to the defining characteristic of orc society: mob rule and internal conflict. To an outsider, an orc camp looks like a riot that never ends. There is no police force, no judiciary, and no code of conduct. Order is maintained solely through the immediate application of violence. Disputes over loot, territory, or who has the loudest voice are settled in the pit. These are gladiatorial zones demarcated in every settlement where orcs can beat each other to death without damaging valuable equipment. This infighting is not a flaw in their society, it is a biological necessity. Orcs are aggressive by design. If they do not have an external enemy to fight, that aggression turns inward. A warboss who cannot provide a good war will find his boys fighting each other. While this results in casualties, it serves as a rigorous natural selection process. The weak, the slow, and the stupid are culled by their own peers in bar brawls and pit fights. Only the strongest survive the peace times. When a WAAAGH finally launches, the army that emerges is composed entirely of veterans who have spent their downtime murdering each other for practice. The friction is further amplified by the clan system. Orcs are not a monolith. They are divided into distinct subcultures with genetic predispositions. The Goths are dour, black-clad traditionalists who view shooting as cowardly and prefer melee combat. The Evil Sunts are speed-addicted adrenaline junkies who spend every tooth they have on red paint and fuel. The Death Skulls are kleptomaniacs and superstitious looters who paint themselves blue for luck. When these clans are forced together in a single WAAAGH, tensions flare. A Goth Knob will naturally try to bully an Evil Sunts biker for being un-orky, leading to brawls that can engulf entire encampments. The warboss manages this chaos not by suppressing it, but by directing it. He is the lightning rod. When the internal pressure becomes too great, when the Goths are about to massacre the Bad Moons, or the speed freaks are threatening to drive off on their own, the warboss steps in. He cracks a few heads, executes the primary troublemakers, and then points a giant power claw at the sky and screams for a WAAAGH. He gives them a target. The promise of an external fight against humans, Eldar, or Tyranids is the only thing that unifies the clans. The internal violence is sublimated into a collective crusade. This dynamic creates a society that is paradoxically stable in its instability. A coup d'etat is a daily occurrence. Any knob who thinks he is hard enough can challenge the warboss. If he wins, he is the new warboss, and the WAAAGH continues without a pause. If he loses, his head ends up on a spike on the warboss's trophy rack. the boss bull, serving as a warning to others. This boss bull is the closest thing orcs have to a constitutional document. It displays the icons of the defeated, a physical resume of the leader's capacity for violence. A warboss with a bare pole is untrusted. A warboss with a pole groaning under the weight of space marine helmets and rival knob skulls is followed fanatically. The social glue is the mob. An orc is never alone. They live, eat, sleep, and fight in packs. A mob is not just a tactical unit, it is a family unit. A group of boys who survive a few battles together form a bond forged in bloodshed. They adopt a shared identity, often based on their preferred method of killing. Burnaboys are pyromaniacs who obsess over fire. Tankbustas are big game hunters who live to destroy vehicles. Lootas are heavies who scavenge the biggest guns they can carry. These subgroups create their own micro-hierarchies within the greater tribe. A mob of knobs is a terrifying force, a clique of the elite who bully everyone else. Even the Gretchen have a hierarchy in the shadows of the giants. While they are universally abused by the orcs, a head honcho, Grot, who serves a powerful warboss, wields proxy power. He can deny a regular boy extra ammo or give him the moldy fungus bread simply because he has the warboss's ear. This creates a layer of petty bureaucracy where favors are traded in the dark, and a Grot assassin might slip a grenade into the sleeping role of a bully. The economy and hierarchy ultimately serve the biological imperative, expansion. As the tribe grows rich on teeth and scrap, the mechs build larger transport ships. The rocks and space hulks are fitted with massive engines paid for by the plunder of a dozen worlds. The warboss, now swollen to the size of a battle tank, looks at the star map or just points at a bright light in the sky and bellows the order to move. The infighting momentarily ceases, replaced by the unified roar of millions of throats. The social structure, having culled the weak and enriched the strong, transforms from a squabbling rabble into a singular, blunt instrument of conquest. The efficiency of this system is terrifying to imperial observers because it cannot be decapitated in the traditional sense. In an imperial crusade, if you assassinate the Lord General and disrupt the supply lines, the army falters. Morale breaks, orders are lost, and the offensive stalls. In an orc WAAAGH, if you kill the warboss, the WAAAGH does not stop. It pauses. For a few days or perhaps only hours, the knobs will turn on each other in a frenzy of violence to determine the successor. The strongest will emerge, bloodied and larger than before, and the WAAAGH will resume with renewed ferocity. You cannot starve them, for they eat the fungus that grows on their own dead. You cannot bankrupt them, for their money grows in their mouths. You cannot demoralize them, for war is their entertainment. This resilience extends to their captured territories. An orc-controlled world is not a ruin, it is a hive of activity. The proper architecture of the orcs takes over. Imperial cathedrals are reinforced with scrap metal and turned into gargant garages. Statues of the emperor are defaced and reshaped into effigies of Gork and Mork. The sky turns choked with smog as the mech boys fire up the furnaces. It is a brutal industrialization. The economy of teeth and violence transforms a peaceful agri world into a fortress of spiky metal and guns within months. The local human population, if not wiped out, is enslaved to dig in the mines or load the shells, becoming just another resource in the teeth economy, valued less than a good squig, but more than a rock. The might makes right philosophy is not just a slogan, it is a fundamental law of physics for the greenskin. It simplifies the universe into binary states, strong or weak, alive or dead, orc or enemy. It strips away the pretense of diplomacy and exposes the raw, ugly truth of the 41st millennium, that in the end the galaxy belongs to whoever can hit the hardest. And the orcs, with their self-repairing bodies, their disposable currency, and their endless appetite for war, are hitting very hard indeed. While the might makes right philosophy provides the vertical spine of orc society, establishing the hierarchy from the lowliest grot to the mightiest warboss, the horizontal structure is defined by the clans. These are not merely political factions or tribal allegiances in the human sense. They are genetically encoded subcultures, distinct strains of the orcoid fungus that determine a greenskin's temperament, tactical preferences, and even their fashion sense. When a spore lands and germinates, it does not just produce a generic orc. It produces an orc with a predilection for specific behaviors hardwired by the old ones millions of years ago. This genetic diversity ensures that a WAAAGH is not just a mob of infantry. but a combined arms force possessing heavy support, mechanized elements, stealth specialists, and logistical masters. There are countless minor tribes scattered across the galaxy, but they all ultimately align with one of the 6 great clans, known in the crude Ork tongue as kulturs. The most numerous, aggressive, and arguably the most archetypal of these is the Goth clan. If an Imperial Guardsman closes his eyes and imagines an Ork, he is imagining a Goth. They are the brutal baseline of the species, the anchor around which the rest of the race revolves. Goths view themselves as the only proper Orks, dismissing the idiosyncrasies of the other clans as frivolous nonsense. To a Goth, warfare is not about speed, cunning, or buying the best gun. It is about getting close enough to the enemy to hit them with something heavy. They are traditionalists of violence, adhering strictly to a philosophy of direct confrontation. Visually, the Goths are terrifying in their austerity. They reject the bright, garish colors favored by other clans, viewing camouflage as cowardly and bright colors as unnecessary. Instead, they paint their armor and vehicles predominantly black, often accented with white checkerboard patterns, a motif that dates back to the Horus Heresy and the Ulanor Crusade, though the Orks themselves have forgotten why they use it. The Goth aesthetic is heavy, industrial, and menacing. Their armor plates are jagged slabs of iron bolted directly onto their flesh or under suits, and their helmets are frequently adorned with massive bull horns, symbolizing their charging fury. In battle, the Goths rely on the green tide. They field the largest mobs of boys, creating a literal wall of muscle and choppas that rolls over enemy positions through sheer weight of numbers. They disdain complex ranged weaponry, preferring sluggas and stick bombs that allow them to maintain forward momentum. While they possess mech boys and heavy walkers like Def Dreads, these machines are built for durability and crushing power rather than range or sophistication. The Goth preference for melee combat produces the largest and most lethal knobs in the galaxy. Because Goths are constantly in the thick of the closest fighting, the survivors grow larger and stronger at a rate that outpaces other clans. It is no coincidence that the most feared warboss of the 41st millennium, WAAAGH Uruk Thraka, is a Goth. His rise from a lowly grunt on Urk to the prophet of the WAAAGH is the ultimate expression of the Goth ideal, pure, unadulterated violence leading to supreme command. Goth armies are also home to the specialist mobs known as Skarbais. These are veterans who have survived enough battles to be covered in thick, ropey scar tissue. In Ork physiology, damage begets strength. A healed bone is stronger than the original, and scarred skin is tougher than leather. Skarbais are effectively living tanks, capable of shrugging off lasfire that would fell a lesser Ork, and they form the elite shock troops of any Goth offensive. While the Goths rely on brute force, the Bad Moons rely on economic superiority. This clan represents the merchant class of Ork society, a caste of wealthy, ostentatious gun nuts who believe that if you can't crush the enemy, you should simply blow them up with the most expensive explosives available. The biological quirk of the Bad Moons is that their teeth, the universal Ork currency, grow faster and degrade slower than those of any other clan. This essentially means that every Bad Moon is born with a trust fund growing in his mouth. They are the richest Orks in the galaxy, and they are not shy about showing it. A Bad Moon army is a riot of yellow and gold. They paint their armor in bright, banana yellow hues because they believe yellow represents wealth and creates bigger explosions. Their gear is the best that Teef can buy. While a Goth is content with a rusted cleaver, a Bad Moon Nob will carry a custom-built, twin-linked shooter with gold-plated barrels and an underslung rocket launcher. They are the primary source of heavy firepower in a WAAAGH. Bad Moon mobs are responsible for fielding the highest concentration of flash gits, knobs who are obsessed with their guns, constantly modifying them with scopes, laser sights, and louder muzzle brakes. This wealth breeds a specific social dynamic. Other clans, particularly the poverty-stricken Death Skulls, despise the Bad Moons for their arrogance and their hoarding of resources. Bad Moons are often seen as lazy by Ork standards, preferring to have their Gretchen slaves do the manual labor while they sit back and eat squig pies. However, their contribution to the war effort is undeniable. They fund the construction of the Gargants, they purchase the raw materials for the space fleets, and on the battlefield, they lay down a curtain of fire so dense that accuracy becomes irrelevant. Mordaka is not just a catchphrase for the bad moons, it is a tactical doctrine. They do not aim, they saturate the grid square until nothing is left standing. Their obsession with technology also means they employ more teleportation tech and force fields than other clans, preferring to zap into battle wearing mega armor rather than slogging through the mud. Diametrically opposed to the static firepower of the bad moons are the speed-crazed adrenaline junkies of the evil Sunts. If the Goths are the anvil, the evil Sunts are the hammer that strikes at 300 kilometers per hour. This clan is dominated by the cult of speed. For an evil Sunts orc, the sensation of rapid movement is a drug. The vibration of an engine, the smell of burning promethium, and the wind whipping past their face triggers a euphoric dopamine response in their brain that is more satisfying than violence itself. The evil Sunts are responsible for the vast majority of the mechanized warfare in the Ork Empire. They operate under the psychic axiom that red ones go faster. Consequently, their vehicles are universally painted a bright blood red. This is not merely decoration. As discussed previously, the WAAAGH field makes these red vehicles physically faster than their engines should allow. An evil Sunts truck with a red chassis will outrun a blue one with the exact same engine specifications. Their armies are composed almost entirely of warbikers, buggies, trucks, and battle wagons. An evil Sunts orc will rarely walk if he can drive. They suffer from a psychological condition where they become lethargic and irritable if forced to remain stationary for too long. Their mech boys are arguably the most skilled in the galaxy when it comes to propulsion and combustion engines. They can coax terrifying speeds out of scrap metal engines, often bypassing safety regulators to inject raw promethium directly into the intake manifolds. This makes their vehicles prone to exploding, but to an evil Sunts boy, dying in a massive fireball while crossing the sound barrier is a glorious way to go. The tactical utility of the evil Sunts is their ability to encircle and overrun enemy positions before a defense can be established. They act as the vanguard of the WAAAGH, striking deep into enemy territory to disrupt supply lines and sow chaos. However, their addiction to speed often makes them unreliable. They have a tendency to race past the objective simply because they didn't want to slow down. If the evil Sunts are the drivers, the Death Skulls are the mechanics and thieves. This clan is composed of kleptomaniacs, scavengers, and looters who believe that all property is theft, and therefore, they are just reclaiming what is rightfully theirs. The Death Skulls are culturally defined by superstition. They paint themselves and their equipment blue because they believe blue is a lucky color that attracts the favor of Mork. A Death Skull warrior will smear blue war paint on his face to deflect bullets, and he will paint his stolen tank blue to prevent the engine from seizing up. The Death Skulls are the masters of the loot. After a battle, and frequently during it, Death Skull mobs will descend upon the wreckage like locusts. They strip the dead of weapons, boots, and armor. They dismantle destroyed enemy tanks, hauling away the chassis to be refitted. Nothing goes to waste. A Death Skull army is a ragtag collection of stolen Imperial Leman Russ battle tanks, Rhino transports, and even damaged Eldar skimmers, all bolted together with orc scrap and painted blue. They are the primary source of lutas, heavily armed orcs who wield diff guns, shoulder-mounted heavy weapons cobbled together from 3 or 4 different guns taped into a single firing mechanism. Because they deal constantly with stolen technology, the Death Skulls have a higher percentage of mech boys than any other clan. These mechs are experts at customizing captured gear. They can take a las cannon, wire it to a plasma generator, and jam it onto a truck turret. The Death Skulls are notoriously light-fingered, and inter-clan violence often erupts when a Goth or Bad Moon wakes up to find his favorite shooter missing, only to see a Death Skull using it 10 minutes later. They justify this by claiming they are merely borrowing it to make it better. While the Death Skulls are viewed as thieves, the Blood Axes are viewed as traitors and cowards, despite being the most tactically sound of all the clans. The Blood Axes are a paradox in Orc society. They value strategy over mindless aggression. This clan has had the most contact with the Imperium of Man, often serving as mercenaries for unscrupulous planetary governors or rogue traders. Through this exposure, they have absorbed concepts of military discipline, camouflage, and chain of command, concepts that other orcs find laughably un-orky. A Blood Axe orc looks distinct. They wear looted Imperial Guard uniforms, complete with caps, boots, and webbing, often worn incorrectly or in mockery. They utilize camouflage patterns, not because they understand the science of visual disruption, but because they have seen humans use it and believe it makes them invisible. Because of the WAAAGH field, this belief often works. A blood axe in bright purple and green camo standing in a gray urban ruin is surprisingly hard to target. Tactically, the blood axes are the only clan that utilizes retreat as a valid maneuver. A Goth will fight until he dies. A blood axe will fall back, lure the enemy into an ambush, and then counter-attack. To other clans, this looks like running away, earning the blood axes a reputation for cowardice. They are the masters of the commando, specialist stealth troops who infiltrate enemy lines to sabotage generators and assassinate officers. These commandos use darkness, cover, and silence, traits that are anathema to the average greenskin. Despite the distrust they face, warbosses value blood axes because they are the only ones capable of planning a complex planetary invasion that involves more than just run at the enemy and scream. They act as the intelligence officers and special forces of the WAAAGH. At the opposite end of the technological spectrum lie the snakebites. If the blood axes are the modernists, the snakebites are the reactionaries. They are traditionalists who believe that technology has made the orc race soft. They cling to the old ways, preferring to ride into battle on massive, biologically engineered boars rather than in trucks. Their name is derived from their initiation ritual, where a snakebite orc allows a venomous serpent to bite him to prove his toughness. This constant exposure to toxins makes them incredibly resilient to poison and chemical warfare. The snakebites are the masters of the squig and the fungus. Their runthirds are the best in the galaxy, breeding massive, ferocious beasts that rival tanks in destructive potential. A snakebite army is a stampede of biological horrors. They field squigoths, mountainous, dinosaur-like creatures that carry howdahs filled with boys and artillery pieces on their backs. They utilize cyborgs, aggressive pigs fitted with crude bionics and engines, serving as rough riders. While they do use guns, snakebites prefer simple, reliable technology that won't jam when covered in mud. They look like feral barbarians, clad in furs, leather, and bone trophies, often eschewing heavy armor in favor of war paint and thick skin. They are the survivalists of the orc race. If a WAAAGH is stranded on a death world with no technology, the bad moons will whine and the evil sunts will despair, but the snakebites will thrive, taming the local apex predators and turning the hostile environment into a weapon. Finally, existing outside the clan structure entirely are the freebooters. These are not a clan by birth, but a fraternity of outcasts. Freebooters are orcs who have been kicked out of their original clan for being too eccentric, too treacherous, or simply too annoying. Having lost the protection of their tribe, they take to the stars, forming bands of pirates and mercenaries. Freebooters are the privateers of the Ork Empire. They travel in kill cruisers, raiding shipping lanes and selling their services to the highest bidder, usually other orc warbosses, but occasionally other races if the pay is good enough. Their culture is a grotesque parody of human naval tradition. They wear bicorn hats, long coats, and eye patches. They are led by captains rather than warbosses, the most famous of whom is Captain Badrock, a legendarily greedy pirate who wields a radiation-spewing gun known as the Ripper. Freebooters are meritocratic in the most cutthroat sense. Since they have no clan support, they only survive by being profitable. They are often heavily armed with custom weapons purchased with their plunder. A freebooter mob, often called Flash Gits, is a terrifying wall of firepower, as every member tries to outdo his shipmates with a bigger, louder, and shinier gun. They introduce a chaotic, mercenary element to orc warfare. A warboss might hire a fleet of freebooters to provide void support, only to find the pirates switching sides mid-battle because the enemy offered them a bigger pile of loot. These 6 clans, Goths, Bad Moons, Evil Sunts, Death Skulls, Blood Axes, and Snakebites, along with the outcast freebooters, form the fractured yet functional kaleidoscope of orc society. In a massive WAAAGH, these elements combine. The Goths provide the main infantry spine, the Bad Moons provide the heavy artillery, the Evil Sunts act as the rapid response force, the Death Skulls handle logistics and scavenging, the Blood Axes execute special operations, and the Snakebites provide the biological siege engines. It is a terrifying synergy of primitive brutality and genetic specialization, proving once again that the Old Ones designed a weapon that is greater than the sum of its parts. This cultural fragmentation also dictates the visual landscape of an Ork invasion. When the Greenskins make planetfall, the defenders are not met with a uniform army, but a chaotic rainbow of destruction. The black-clad tide of the Goths surges through the center, flanked by the roaring red engines of the Speed Freaks. Yellow rockets from Bad Moon positions streak across the sky, while blue-painted looters pick through the wreckage in the rear. Amidst the ruins, camouflaged Bloodaxe commandos slit throats in the dark, and the ground shakes under the tread of snakebite squigoths. It is an assault on the senses as much as a military strike, a cacophony of warring colors and philosophies united only by the singular desire to destroy. The interplay between the clans is also the primary source of friction within a WAAAGH when there is no enemy to fight. A Bad Moon mech might refuse to fix an evil Sunspike because the Speed Freak didn't have enough teeth, leading to a brawl that draws in a mob of Goths who just want to punch someone. A Deathskull might steal a Snakebite's prize squig to eat it, resulting in a riot. These inter-clan rivalries are fierce and often lethal, but they serve a purpose. They keep the Orks sharp. A warboss must be politically cunning enough to balance the needs of the clans, ensuring the Bad Moons get the best firing positions, while the evil Sunts get the first crack at the open plains. The existence of the clans also explains the adaptability of the Ork race. If an Ork force is defeated in a way that neutralizes their vehicles, the evil Sunts' influence diminishes, and the Snakebites or Goths rise to prominence to adapt to the new tactical reality. If a WAAAGH runs out of ammunition, the Goths and Snakebites take over with choppas and spears. If the fighting turns into a void war, the Bad Moons and Freebooters take the lead. The genetic diversity ensures that there is no single tactical doctrine that can permanently defeat the Ork menace. They simply shift their cultural dominance to meet the specific threat at hand. While the biological and social structures of the Orks are formidable, they are merely the delivery mechanism for the true horror of the Greenskin, their religion. The clans may squabble over tactics and teeth, but they are unified in their worship of the twin gods, Gork and Mork. This theological framework is not a matter of faith, but of observable reality. The Orks do not pray in the hope of salvation. They shout to attract the attention of deities they know are watching. Gork and Mork are the metaphysical reflection of the Ork psyche, brutal, cunning, and infinitely strong. Understanding the nature of these gods is essential to understanding why the Orks fight with such joyous abandon. This religious devotion to the twin gods of violent potential finds its most tangible expression not in temples of stone, but in the screeching, smoking, oil-stained cathedrals of industry managed by the mech boys. If the warboss is the will of the WAAAGH, the mech is its hands. The transition from a primitive tribe wielding spears to an interstellar empire capable of constructing starships is entirely dependent on the cult of the mech. This is not a formal institution with degrees and safety regulations, but a genetic imperative that unlocks within the mind of specific Orks. As the WAAAGH grows, the latent knowledge encoded by the Old Ones activates, transforming a brute who barely knows which end of a hammer to hold into a savant of ballistics, energy shielding, and subatomic physics. The methodology of the mechba is an affront to the Adeptus Mechanicus. An imperial tech priest spends decades learning the sacred rites to maintain a single plasma generator, treating the machine with superstitious dread. A mechba, conversely, operates on pure, unadulterated instinct. He looks at a pile of wreckage, a destroyed rhino transport, a downed aircraft, and a heap of rebar, and he does not see garbage. He sees the potential for a truck, a defcopta, or a generator. He does not measure tolerances or calculate load-bearing capacities. He welds metal plates together until it looks about right. If a connection is loose, he hammers a rivet into it. If an engine runs hot, he kicks it or pours squig oil into the intake. This intuitive engineering results in technology that is terrifyingly idiosyncratic. No two Ork weapons or vehicles are identical. A Shuta produced by a mech in the Armageddon sector might use a belt feed mechanism salvaged from a heavy bolter, while a Shuta from the Charadon sector might use a gravity-fed hopper made from a fuel can. Yet, both weapons function with lethal efficiency. This functionality is the subject of intense debate among Imperial Xeno scholars. While the WAAAGH field certainly smooths over the rough edges of physics, preventing engines from seizing and guns from jamming as often as they should. The underlying technology is surprisingly robust. Orks build things to survive the way orks live, violently. Their machines are over-engineered in terms of durability, featuring redundant fuel lines, thick armor plating, and simple mechanical actions that can function even when clogged with mud, blood, or sand. The standard armament of the Ork boy, the Shuta, exemplifies this philosophy. It is a high-caliber automatic weapon that prioritizes noise and rate of fire over accuracy. To an Ork, the sensory experience of firing a weapon is just as important as the terminal ballistics. A gun that is loud and produces a massive muzzle flare is considered better than a quiet, precise las gun. These weapons fire solid slugs, often the size of a human thumb, which can punch through flak armor and shatter bone with kinetic force alone. The slugga is the pistol equivalent, a heavy, brutal hand cannon used in conjunction with the choppa. The choppa is a broad category covering any melee weapon that can hack a limb off. While they appear crude, often looking like jagged lengths of scrap metal or rusted axes, mechs often fit them with monofilament edges or powered chain teeth. A knob's choppa is heavy enough that, when swung with the strength of a greenskin elite, it can crack the ceramite plating of a space marine. For the more discerning knob, the power claw is the weapon of choice. These are hydraulic, piston-driven gauntlets surrounded by a disruptive energy field, similar to Imperial power fists but far cruder in appearance. A power claw does not hum with a refined energy signature. It crackles and sparks, leaking ozone, and operates like a giant industrial shear, capable of snipping the barrel off a Lehman Russ battle tank or crushing a Terminator in a vice grip. As the mech's expertise grows, so does the complexity of the arsenal. The Burna is a weaponized industrial cutting tool, effectively a heavy flamethrower that can switch settings to become a plasma torch for cutting through bulkheads. Rocket launches are exactly what they sound like: crude, recoil-heavy tubes that fire erratic solid-fuel rockets. Orks do not use guidance systems, they rely on volume of fire. A tank-busta mob doesn't need a target lock. They simply fill the air with enough spiraling explosives that the enemy tank inevitably hits one. However, the pinnacle of Ork infantry weaponry, and the clearest evidence of their lost Krork heritage, is the shock attack gun. This weapon is a technological marvel and a war crime rolled into one. It is a heavy, shoulder-mounted device that generates a localized tunnel through the warp. The ammunition for this weapon is the snotling. The mech utilizes a vacuum hopper to suck up terrified snotlings from the battlefield. When the trigger is pulled, the snotling is hurled through the immaterium. The experience drives the snotling instantly and irrevocably insane. The weapon then rematerializes the warp-crazed creature at the target coordinates. The horror of this weapon lies in the lack of precision regarding where the snotling appears. It might materialize inside the cockpit of a sentinel, scratching and biting the pilot's face. It might appear inside the fuel tank of a chimera, clogging the lines with its body. Or, in the most gruesome cases, it materializes inside the living flesh of an enemy soldier, or within the adamantium shell of Terminator armor. The sudden displacement of matter, combined with the frenzied thrashing of the creature, results in a catastrophic biological explosion. It is a weapon that utilizes teleportation technology not for transport, but for internal organ disruption. This mastery of force fields and energy projection extends to the defense of the Horde. Big mechs often carry custom force fields, portable generators strapped to their backs that project a crackling bubble of energy. These fields are notoriously unstable, often flickering or shorting out, but when they work, they can stop an orbital bombardment. The energy intercepts incoming projectiles and dissipates them in a shower of sparks. The mech does not understand the harmonic frequencies required to tune the field. He simply turns the dial to max and hopes the generator doesn't melt into his spine. Moving beyond infantry gear, the true obsession of the mech boy is the walker. Orks have a deep psychological affinity for bipedal war engines. It resonates with their desire to stomp things. The smallest of these is the kilocan. Standing roughly 3 meters tall, a kilocan is a trash-can-shaped armored walker fitted with a buzz saw or power claw on one arm and a heavy weapon on the other. Uniquely, kilocans are not piloted by Orks, but by Gretchen. The wiring process is permanent. The grot is surgically implanted into the chassis. For a Gretchen who spends his entire life being kicked and bullied, the Killacan represents the ultimate power trip. Suddenly, he is made of iron. He has a rocket launcher. He is taller than a knob. This psychology makes Killacans incredibly dangerous but erratic. They fight with the viciousness of the oppressed, often exhibiting a cruel glee as they butcher infantry. However, they retain the Grot's inherent cowardice. If a Killacan takes a solid hit or sees a larger enemy walker, the pilot is likely to panic, flailing wildly or attempting to scuttle away. The larger cousin of the can is the Def Dread. This is a true terror weapon, a hulking mass of pistons, exhaust stacks, and armor plates that towers over the battlefield. Unlike the can, the Def Dread is piloted by an Ork. To become a Def Dread pilot is not a tactical assignment, it is a lifestyle choice. An Ork who is obsessed with killing, who feels that his flesh body is too slow or too fragile, will pay a mech and a painboy a fortune in teeth to be interred within the machine. The process is gruesome. The Ork is hardwired into the Dread's control systems. His nervous system is spliced into the hydraulics. His eyes are replaced with sensor feeds. Once inside, he never comes out. The Def Dread becomes his body. These machines typically mount 2 heavy guns and 2 massive power claws, allowing them to tear through infantry formations like a harvester through wheat. The pilot's aggression is amplified by the machine, resulting in a berserker construct that charges headlong into the heaviest fire, screaming electronic war cries through external Vox casters. As the WAAAGH scales up, the walkers grow from tactical assets to strategic god effigies. The Stampa is the next tier of escalation. These are super heavy walkers, comparable in size to an Imperial Warhound or Reaver Titan, though much bulkier. A Stampa is built from the detritus of the warzone. It is a walking fortress, often shaped to resemble a fat, skirted Ork. They are armed with death cannons, massive artillery pieces mounted on the arms, and supagattlers, rotary cannons the size of a hab block. A Stampa is not just a vehicle, it is a transport and a shrine. It carries mobs of boys inside its hollow torso, who can fire their shootas out of firing ports. It is usually crewed by a team of Gretchen riggers led by a mech, who runs around inside the machine hitting things with a wrench to keep the reactor from going critical. The Stampa's movement is a lumbering waddle, terrifying in its inevitability. When a Stampa falls, it is often because it has been tripped or because the structural integrity of its legs gave out, rather than enemy fire. The apex of Ork engineering is the Gargant. These are the god engines, the greenskin answer to the Emperor-class Titans of the Collegia Titanica. A Gargant is a mountain of metal, a mobile city of destruction that dominates the skyline. They are built in the image of Gork and Mork, squat, broad-shouldered, and bellicose. Constructing a Gargant requires the resources of an entire planetary system and the collective psychic belief of millions of Orks. Gargants are so massive that they possess their own gravitational pull of morale. When a Gargant activates, belching black smoke that blots out the sun, the WAAAGH enters a state of religious ecstasy. The weaponry mounted on a Gargant defies classification. The belly gun is a common fixture, a massive siege mortar protruding from the idol's gut that fires shells the size of dropships. Their arms end in snappers, large enough to crush a Baneblade tank, or Ripper fists that act as chainsaws for tearing down hive spires. Defensively, Gargants rely on layers of power fields, projected by massive, sputtering generators. These fields absorb incredible amounts of punishment, glowing with green energy as they deflect turbo laser blasts and volcano cannon shots. Inside, the Gargant is a chaotic hive of activity. Catwalks crisscross the interior, where hundreds of grots haul ammunition and repair ruptured steam pipes. The command deck, located in the head, is the throne room of the WAAAGH's supreme warboss, or the head mech, who steers the beast by barking orders at a crew pulling massive levers. While these walkers dominate the ground, the Ork mastery of teleportation technology, or teleporta tech, adds a dimension of verticality and surprise to their warfare that few enemies anticipate. Imperial teleportation is a stable, ritualized science used primarily by the Terminators of the Adeptus Astartes. Ork teleportation is a violent shove through the warp. The technology is based on massive generator, arrays that crack open reality and beam matter from point A to point B. The primary use of the teleporta is to deliver heavy infantry directly into the enemy's face. Meganobs, orcs encased in ultra-heavy, piston-driven mega armor, are too slow to walk across a battlefield. Instead, a mech will beam them from an orbiting kill cruiser directly onto the enemy's bridge or into the center of a fortification. The accuracy is notoriously poor. Orcs might materialize mid-air and fall to their deaths, or fuse partially with the floor plates. To the orcs, these are acceptable losses. The psychological impact of a squad of 2-ton armored killing machines suddenly appearing in a flash of green lightning inside a secure bunker is devastating. This technology is also weaponized on a grand scale. During the War of the Beast, the orcs utilized gravity whips and teleportation raised to move entire moons. In the 41st millennium, big mechs have refined the lift-a-droppa, a tractor beam weapon that can pick up an enemy tank, lift it high into the air, and then simply turn off, letting gravity do the work. Or more amusingly, they use it to smash 2 enemy tanks together. The Teleport Blasta is a handheld version of this tech, used to beam chunks of the enemy away. Being hit by a Teleport Blasta does not burn or cut. It simply removes a sphere of matter, flesh, armor, and bone, and scatters its atoms into the warp. It is a clean, terrifyingly silent way to die amidst the roar of orc warfare. The integration of this technology, the shootas, the walkers, and the teleportas, creates a mechanical ecosystem that mirrors the biological one. Just as the fungi feed the squigs, which feed the orcs, the scavenged scrap feeds the mechs, who build the cans, which support the dreads, which escort the stampas. It is a hierarchy of metal and oil. The brilliance of the orc war engine lies in its sustainability. An imperial army that loses its supply of refined promethium or bolter shells is doomed. An orc army that runs out of ammo simply switches to choppas. If a battle wagon is destroyed, the mech strips the working parts to build 2 buggies. The wreckage of the enemy becomes the reinforcements of the orcs. This scavenging is not limited to raw materials. It applies to hulls as well. The looted wagon is a staple of the orc motor pool. A Leman Russ tank captured by orcs will not be used as a Leman Russ. The turret might be removed and replaced with a larger, more inaccurate cannon. The engine will be souped up to run on volatile squig fuel, doubling its speed but having its lifespan. A captured rhino might be cut open to serve as an open-top truck. Even Necron monoliths and Eldar wave serpents have been observed with crude orc tracks bolted onto them, their elegant anti-gravity engines replaced by smoky internal combustion blocks, because the orcs trust the rumble of an engine more than the silent hum of Xeno's tech. The ultimate expression of this technological prowess is the Space Hulk. Orcs do not typically build starships from scratch in shipyards. They capture asteroids, hollow them out, and bolt massive engines to the back. Or they take the drifting graveyards of ships found in the warp, masses of fused Imperial cruisers, Xeno's vessels, and rock, and inhabit them. A space hulk is a drifting continent of rust and iron. Inside, millions of orcs live in a sprawling, metallic ecosystem. The engines of these behemoths are often powered by warp drives that are little more than massive energy coils that tear a hole in reality, allowing the hulk to plunge into the immaterium. Navigation is handled by the instinct of the pilots and the WAAAGH energy calming the local warp storms. When a space hulk arrives in a system, it is an extinction-level event. These vessels are too large to be destroyed by conventional naval fire. They act as invasion arcs, crashing directly into the planet's surface. The impact alone can shatter continents. Once the dust settles, the doors open, often just holes blown in the hull, and the green tide spills forth, supported by the walkers and war engines that were constructed during the transit. Thus, the orc technology is not a pale imitation of the civilized races, it is a dark mirror. It reflects the truth that in the grim darkness of the far future, sophistication is a liability. Delicate sensors can be jammed, complex supply lines can be cut. But a slab of iron powered by a dirty engine and the belief of a billion screaming aliens is unstoppable. The mech boy does not need to understand the laws of the universe to break them. He just needs a wrench, a blowtorch, and a target. This reliance on the tangible, the loud, and the destructive in orc technology is not merely a matter of engineering preference. It is the direct liturgical practice of their theology. To an imperial citizen, religion is a matter of quiet prayer, incense, and submission to the Golden Throne. To an orc, worship is indistinguishable from warfare. The clang of hammers on scrap metal, The roar of unshielded engines and the deafening staccato of heavy weapons fire are the hymns of the greenskin race. They do not have priests in robes. They have mech boys covered in grease and weird boys vomiting ectoplasmic fire. At the center of this cacophony sit two entities that define the entirety of the Ork existence, the twin gods who dwell in the warp but remain utterly distinct from the ruinous powers, Gork and Mork. Understanding Gork and Mork is the key to understanding the terrifying stability of the Ork psyche. While the Chaos gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, represent specific emotional spectrums of sentient races, Gork and Mork are the personification of the Ork biological imperative. They are not subtle, they are not complex, and they do not bargain. They are the divine reflection of the greenskin soul, an unstoppable force of hooliganism on a galactic scale. The distinction between the two is a subject of endless, violent debate among Ork theologians. The standard definition, accepted across most clans, is that Gork is brutal but cunning, while Mork is cunning but brutal. To a human mind, this distinction seems semantic or nonsensical, but to an Ork, it represents the two fundamental approaches to survival and conquest. Gork is the god of the frontal assault. He is the patron of the knob who walks directly up to a bunker, ignoring the law's fire burning his skin, and crushes the defenders with a power claw. He represents direct, overwhelming force, the iron fist that smashes through the door. When a Goth warboss leads a charge, bellowing at the top of his lungs and swinging a chain axe, he is channeling Gork. Gork hits you in the face when you are looking right at him, and he hits you so hard that strategy becomes irrelevant. His cunning lies in the fact that he knows exactly where to hit to cause the most damage, but the delivery is always direct. Mork, conversely, is the god of the flank, the ambush, and the dirty trick. He is the patron of the Blood Axe Commando who paints himself purple to sneak behind enemy lines, or the Gretchen who waits until a space marine is reloading to stab him in the knee joint. Mork hits you when you aren't looking. He is the low blow, the trap, the concealed weapon. His brutality is no less severe than Gork's, but it is applied with a layer of guile. When a speed freak mech overcharges an engine to flank a tank column, or when a Death Skull loots a minefield to relay it in the enemy's path, they are doing Mork's work. Together, these two entities form a complete circle of violence. There is no aspect of war that falls outside their domain. Unlike the Imperium, which fractures its worship between the protection of the Emperor and the fear of the heretic, or the Eldar who mourn their shattered pantheon, the Orks are spiritually whole. Their gods are not dead, nor are they distant. Orks believe Gork and Mork are constantly watching them, judging them not on their morality, but on the quality of the fight. A good death in the eyes of Gork and Mork is not a peaceful passing. It is dying while taking as many enemies with you as possible, preferably in a massive explosion. This theology provides the Orks with a spiritual armor that is arguably more effective than the adamantium plating of the Adeptus Astartes. The Ork race is, for all intents and purposes, immune to the corruption of chaos. This is a singularity in the 41st millennium. Every other psychic race, humans, Eldar, even the Tau to a lesser degree, is vulnerable to the whispering temptations of the warp. A human governor might turn to Nurgle to escape death, or to Slaanesh to feel sensation, or to Tzeentch to gain political power. Orks do not fall to these temptations because they lack the spiritual vacuum that chaos fills. An Ork does not fear death, so Nurgle has no leverage. An Ork does not desire forbidden knowledge or political intrigue, rendering Tzeentch's schemes useless. An Ork who wants power simply kills his boss and takes it. Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, finds no purchase in a species that derives its only pleasure from violence and speed, needs already fully met by their own culture. And while Khorne, the blood god, might seem a natural fit for a race obsessed with war, he is ultimately rejected because he is un-Orky. Khorne demands blood for the sake of blood, a grim and serious business. Orks fight because it is fun. They enjoy the noise, the camaraderie, and the looting. To an Ork, a Khornate berserker is just a spiky boy who takes things too seriously and needs a good thumping. There are rare, isolated incidents of Ork warbands being mutated by the warp or manipulated by demons, but these are viewed by the majority of the species as aberrations to be destroyed. The most famous example of the Ork interaction with chaos is the legend of Tuska Demon Killer. Tuska was a warboss who enjoyed fighting demons so much that he flew his WAAAGH directly into the Eye of Terror, bypassing real space targets to find the biggest demons. He eventually landed on a flesh world within Khorne's domain. The fighting was so intense and entertaining that Khorne himself took notice. After Tuska and his boys were finally killed, the blood god resurrected them the next morning. Now, Tuska and his WAAAGH fight an eternal battle in front of the brass citadel, dying every day and waking up every morning to do it again. To a human, this is a hellish damnation. To Tuska, he has found paradise. He is in a place where the fighting never stops, the enemies are tough, and he never has to worry about logistics. This spiritual self-containment creates a phenomenon in the warp known as the Great Green. While the realms of the Chaos Gods are storms of madness, the Ork presence in the Immaterium is described by Eldari Farseers as a raucous, thundering ocean of green energy. It is a collective psychic roar that drowns out the whispers of demons. When a WAAAGH is active, Gork and Mork are said to be physically beating back the other warp entities with giant clubs, clearing a path for their children. This is why Ork Weirdboys, despite channeling immense psychic power without the discipline of a librarian, are rarely possessed by demons. The energy coursing through them is not the raw, undirected warp. It is the specific, filtered energy of the WAAAGH, protected by the laughing brutality of their twin gods. The worship of Gork and Mork manifests physically in the construction of idols. Since orcs are incapable of abstract contemplation, they need to see their gods. This drive leads to the creation of gargants. A gargant is not merely a war engine, as discussed in the context of their technology. It is a religious icon. When a big mech begins the construction of a gargant, he often claims to be receiving visions directly from Gork. These visions do not come as blueprints, but as fever dreams of destruction. The resulting construct is a crude effigy of the orc form. Gargants are fat, squat, and broad-shouldered, mimicking the physique of a dominant warboss. They have heads with glowing eyes and massive, jagged metal teeth. The belly gun, a massive siege cannon located in the stomach of the machine, is a direct representation of the orc belief that power comes from the gut. To the orc, the gargant is the god walking the material plane. When the reactor fires up and the machine takes its first lumbering step, the orcs surrounding it fall into a frenzy. They are not just following a tank, they are following an avatar. This idolatry extends to smaller totems. Every orc settlement features a boss bull or an icon of the gods, usually made from scrap metal, bones, and the helmets of defeated enemies. The Stampa, the smaller cousin of the gargant, is also treated with reverence. The crew of a Stampa will often paint the faceplate of their walker to look like a specific aspect of Gork or Mork, adding war paint, metal tusks, or even a massive cigar made of exhaust piping. The act of maintenance is a ritual. A mech hammering a loose plate back onto a Stampa is performing a sacrament. The oil that stains the ground is holy water. The depth of this theology explains the orc concept of the afterlife, or rather, the lack of fear regarding it. Human doctrine teaches that the soul is in peril, that death brings judgment or dissipation. The Eldar fear the consumption of their souls by she who thirsts. The orcs fear nothing. They believe in reincarnation, though they do not have a fancy word for it. The common orc view is that if they die fighting, they simply go back to the Great Green to be spat out again into a new fungal body. This belief is encapsulated in the famous orc philosophical treatise, or as close as they get to one, often attributed to various warbosses. Orcs is never beaten in battle. If we win, we win. If we die fighting, so it don't count. If we runs for it, we don't die neither, 'cause we can come back for Anover go see. This is not just bravado, it is a genuine metaphysical stance. Death is a temporary setback, a timeout before the next round. Because their reproduction is fungal and asexual, and because their knowledge is genetic, an individual orc does not view his identity as a precious, singular thing. He is part of the fungal tide. As long as the species survives, he survives. This lack of existential dread makes the orcs the most psychologically resilient species in the galaxy. They do not suffer from PTSD. They do not mourn the fallen. They loot the bodies of their dead friends for spare ammo and teeth, assuming that the dead orc won't need them where he's going, and if he comes back, he can get his own. This attitude infuriates their enemies. You cannot terrorize an orc. If you bombard their lines with phosphex and radiation, they don't despair. They shout louder to be heard over the explosions. If you unleash a demon prince, they don't cower. They form a queue to see who gets to fight the big red git. The priesthood of this religion, such as it is, falls to the Weirdboys, but their role is perilous. a weirdboy is a conduit for the voice of Gork and Mork. When the WAAAGH energy builds, the weirdboy begins to convulse. He might start speaking in tongues, babbling prophecies of where the best fighting is, or he might simply start vomiting green energy. The other orcs view the weirdboy with a mix of awe and caution. He is touched by the gods. To be near him is to be near the raw power of the Great Green. This is why weirdboys often live in copper towers or are dragged around in chains. They are living, unstable artifacts of the divine. When a weirdboy unleashes his power, it is often shaped by the imagery of the gods. The psychic power, Fists of Gork, manifests as giant, spectral green hands that descend from the sky to pummel the enemy. De jump is literally Mork picking up a mob of boys and dropping them somewhere else. The Foot of Gork is a manifestation of a massive, ectoplasmic boot stomping on a tank. These are not abstract magical bolts. They are the physical interventions of the deities as interpreted by the Ork mind. The ultimate expression of Ork theology is the WAAAGH itself. It is a holy crusade. When a warboss declares a WAAAGH, he is not just moving troops, he is fulfilling a divine mandate. The prophet of this movement in the modern era is WAAAGH Uruk-Thraka. WAAAGH is unique because he claims to speak to both Gork and Mork simultaneously. In Ork lore, the gods are usually fighting each other, but WAAAGH claims he has united their purpose. He is not just a warlord, he is a messianic figure. His banner-bearer, Makari the Grot, is considered the luckiest Gretchen alive, having survived battles that killed millions of orcs, a fact attributed to Mork's personal favor. WAAAGH's theology is simple. The galaxy is a playground given to the orcs by the gods, and it is their duty to unite it in one massive, eternal war. He does not want to destroy the Imperium, he wants to fight it forever. He famously let Commissar Yarrick live after the Second War for Armageddon because good enemies is hard to find. This decision, baffling to human strategists, is perfectly consistent with Ork religious law. To kill your best enemy is to end the fun. To let him go so he can come back with bigger tanks and more men is the ultimate act of piety. This perspective shifts the narrative of the 41st millennium. To the Imperium, it is a time of ending, of raging against the dying of the light. To the Orks, this is the Golden Age. The galaxy is full of war. The humans are fighting, the bugs are fighting, the spiky boys are fighting. There has never been a better time to be green. Gork and Mork are smiling. Every bolt or shell that detonates, every chainsword that revs, and every city that burns is a prayer offered up to the Great Green. The physical manifestation of this divine approval is the green tide. When the orcs gather in sufficient numbers, the sky above them often turns a sickly, bruising green. This is not a weather phenomenon, it is the bleed-through of the orc psychic presence into real space. Under this green sky, the orcs fight with renewed vigor. Wounds knit faster, guns jam less. The enemy feels a crushing weight of dread, a primal fear that they are standing in the path of a force of nature that cannot be reasoned with or stopped. The totems and glyphs used by the orcs further reinforce this connection. The checkerboard patterns, the jagged dags, and the crude drawings of faces are not random graffiti. They are warding sigils. A glyphed armor plate is believed to be harder than a plain one. A vehicle adorned with the lightning bolt of the evil suns is spiritually lighter and therefore faster. The mechboys etch these symbols into the internal mechanisms of their machines. An Imperial tech priest might find a cog with a crude face scratched into it inside an orc engine. To the mech, that face is the only thing telling the cog which way to turn. Even the squigs are touched by this belief. The gigantic squigoths bred by the snakebites are often draped in religious banners and fetishes. They are beasts of burden, but they are also mobile shrines. To ride a squigoth into battle is to ride a creature of the ecosystem created by the gods. The snakebites, being the most traditionalist clan, hold the closest ties to this primal form of worship. They view the old ways, the reliance on biology and muscle over technology, as the purest form of devotion to Gork and Mork. They argue that technology makes an orc lazy, and that Gork prefers an orc who kills with a flint spear because it shows more grit. Conversely, the speed freaks of the evil Sunts believe that speed is a form of worship. To go fast is to honor the gods. The roar of an engine is a prayer. They paint their faces red not just for speed, but to show their devotion to the adrenaline-fueled violence that Mork loves. The Bad Moons worship through wealth, believing that accumulating teeth and buying the biggest guns is a sign of divine favor. If Gork didn't want them to be rich, he wouldn't have made their teeth grow so fast. This diversity of worship, through speed, through wealth, through tradition, and through theft, ensures that every action an orc takes is a religious act. There is no secular life for a greenskin. Eating, fighting, driving, and building are all facets of the same diamond. They are living in a constant state of holy war, not for a distant reward, but for the joy of the act itself. The resilience this grants the Ork Empire cannot be overstated. You can break a man's faith by showing him the horrors of the universe. You can shatter an Eldar's spirit by destroying their craft world, but you cannot break an orc's faith because the horror of the universe is exactly what he finds funny. The grim darkness of the far future is their natural habitat. They are the apex predators of a galaxy gone mad, sustained by the absolute certainty that they are the best, that they are made for fighting, and that when they die, they are just going back to the Great Green to re-arm for the next round. As the 41st millennium grinds on, the shadow of the Gargants grows longer. The WAAAGH fields intensify, and the laughter of Gork and Mork echoes louder in the warp, drowning out the screams of the dying. The theology of brutality is simple, effective, and terrifyingly complete. It requires no books, no temples, and no converts. It only requires war, and in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. If Gork and Mork are the distant, thundering sky fathers of the greenskin race, then the warlords are their avatars made flesh, the lightning rods that ground the cosmic fury of the WAAAGH into the physical reality of the galaxy. While the common orc is a creature of simple violence, history has produced individuals of such terrifying potency and singular vision that they transcend the anarchic nature of their species. These are not merely tribal leaders, they are biological singularities, evolutionary spikes that threaten to overturn the status quo of the 41st millennium. Foremost among them, a name that is whispered with dread in the stratagems of the Imperial Guard and roared with adulation in the scrap camps of the galaxy, is WAAAGH Uruk-Thraka. To understand the threat WAAAGH poses, one must look past the crude propaganda of the Imperium that paints him as just another oversized brute. His origins on the planet Urk offer a glimpse into the terrifying adaptability of the Orkoid genome. Urk was a backwater world in the galactic west, a place of freezing nights and dying suns. WAAAGH began his existence as a lowly goth boy, indistinguishable from the millions of others, fighting for scraps in the dark. His ascendancy did not begin with a victory, but with a brain injury. During a raid, a bolter shell fired by a space marine of the Space Wolves chapter took a significant portion of his cranium. In any other species, this would be fatal. For WAAAGH, it was an awakening. He fell into the care of the pain boy known as Mad Doc Grotznik. Grotznik, a lunatic even by the standards of his profession, saw an opportunity for his masterpiece. He replaced the missing section of WAAAGH's skull with a crude adamantium plate, wiring the cerebral cortex directly into a bionic eye and a bundle of erratic sensory cables. Whether by accident or the divine intervention of Gork and Mork, this surgery did not lobotomize the orc, it tuned him in. The adamantium plate acted as a receiver for the raw psychic static of the Great Green. WAAAGH awoke not with brain damage, but with visions. He claimed to hear the voices of the gods directly, speaking not of simple looting, but of a grand destiny to unite the galaxy in eternal war. WAAAGH's rise on Urk was meteoric. He did not just beat his rivals, he absorbed them. He displayed a level of strategic acumen that terrified the local knobs, utilizing combined arms tactics and logistical planning that orcs are not supposed to possess. When the star of Urk finally began to die, threatening to freeze the planet, WAAAGH did not panic. He rallied the tribes, pointing to the failing sun as a sign from Gork that it was time to leave. He organized a mass exodus, enslaving the planet's population to construct a fleet of hulks and rocks. This was the birth of the Great WAAAGH. His tactical genius was fully unveiled during the Second War for Armageddon. He did not simply crash into the planet, he dismantled its defenses. He utilized the space hulks to crush the orbital blockade and landed his forces with precision strikes on the Hive world's infrastructure. During the ground war, he encountered Commissar Yarrick, the old man of Armageddon. In Yarrick, WAAAGH found something rare, an enemy worth fighting. The relationship between the two became the defining axis of the conflict. When WAAAGH eventually captured Yarrick at the Battle of Golgotha, he did not execute him, he released him. To the orc mind, killing the best enemy is counterproductive. A good enemy is a resource to be cultivated, allowing them to return stronger so the next fight is even better. This decision marks WAAAGH as a visionary. He plays the long game, treating the galaxy as a garden of war that must be tended. Today, WAAAGH is a monster of industrial proportions. Following his defeat and subsequent resurrection by Grotznik, after a duel with the space wolf Ragnar Blackmane, he stands nearly the size of a Def Dread. His body is a patchwork of stitched flesh and heavy plating, powered by an internal generator that crackles with green lightning. He is the prophet of the WAAAGH, a figure who can unite the fractured clans simply by existing. He moves across the stars, gathering a fleet that numbers in the millions of ships, driven by the singular command of his gods to burn the universe down so it can be built again in green. Yet, as terrifying as WAAAGH is, he represents only the potential of the modern Ork. To see the true apex of the species, the Krork potential realized, Imperial historians must look back to the 32nd millennium and the entity known only as the Beast. The War of the Beast was a conflict that brought the Imperium closer to destruction than the Horus Heresy, yet it is largely purged from Imperial records due to the shame it brought upon the High Lords of Terra. The Beast was not a single warboss, but the title held by a prime Ork, a creature that stood 10 meters tall, the size of a scout titan. This entity ruled from a throne room on the planet Ulanor, the same world where the Emperor had declared the Great Crusade victorious 1,000 years prior. The Beast's forces were not the scavengers of the 41st millennium. They were a highly advanced civilization. They possessed attack moons, planetoids fitted with gravity whips capable of crushing Imperial battle fleets from orbit, and teleportation arrays that could move the moon itself across the galaxy in a heartbeat. The most chilling aspect of the Beast was not his size, but his intellect. During the conflict, an Ork ambassador was dispatched to the High Lords of Terra. This creature walked into the Senatorum Imperialis, towering over the Custodes, and spoke to the rulers of humanity in flawless, aristocratic High Gothic. He mocked their government, demanded their surrender, and exposed the political rot at the heart of the Imperium. This shattered the Imperial dogma that Orks were mindless beasts. The Beast proved that the Greenskins were capable of diplomacy, politics, and psychological warfare on a level that surpassed humanity. The Beast's WAAAGH was so potent that it weaponized the Ork psychic field to a degree never seen since. His weird boys could channel enough energy to crush a Primarch, as Vulcan found during his battles against the Greenskins. The Beast's boys wore standardized power armor, carried mass-produced plasma weaponry, and fought with the discipline of the legions Astartes. It took the combined might of the entire Imperium, the sacrifice of the Imperial Fists chapter, and the resurrection of the Sisters of Silence to finally destabilize the WAAAGH energy enough to kill him. The Beast serves as a grim reminder that the Orks of today are merely the devolved remnants of a super species, and that the capacity to return to that level lies dormant in their blood, waiting for the right trigger. While WAAAGH represents the spiritual future, and the Beast represents the lost past, the present tactical reality of the Ork threat is best exemplified by Nazdreg Ugg-Erdgrub. A warlord of the Bad Moons clan, Nazdreg is the antithesis of the feral berserker. He is an industrialist of war, a creature who understands that firepower is a commodity that can be bought. Nazdreg is obscenely wealthy, even by the standards of a clan whose teeth grow back overnight. He commands a fleet based around his flagship, the WAAAGH, a vessel so heavily modified that it possesses the firepower of a sector battle fleet. Nazdreg's notoriety stems from his intelligence and his mastery of teleporta technology. While most Orks view teleportation as a chaotic gamble, Nazdreg has refined it into a precise tactical doctrine. During the campaign on Pacina 4, he utilized teleportas not just to deploy troops, but to bypass the formidable defenses of the Dark Angel's Space Marine chapter. He would beam heavy walkers and mobs of meganobs directly into critical infrastructure hubs, bypassing minefields and void shields entirely. Unlike WAAAGH, who seeks a spiritual apocalypse, Nazdreg is pragmatic. He fights for profit. He has been known to retreat from battle if the cost in equipment outweighs the potential loot, a behavior that Goths would call cowardly, but which has allowed Nazdreg to survive for decades in a galaxy that kills reckless warbosses daily. He treats his WAAAGH as a business enterprise. His boys are better equipped than any other force in the sector, wielding custom shooters and wearing heavy armor paid for with the plunder of a dozen worlds. He represents the danger of an orc who can do math. He knows exactly how much force is required to crack a fortress, and he will not spend a single tooth more than necessary. His alliance with WAAAGH on Pesina 4 demonstrated a terrifying possibility, the union of Goth Fury and Bad Moon Logistics, a combination that nearly broke the Dark Angel's third company. At the far end of the spectrum, where logic dissolves into pure, unadulterated madness, lies the tale of Tuska Demon Killa. Most orcs are content to fight humans, Eldar, or Tyranids. Tuska, a warboss of significant power, found these enemies boring. They broke too easily. They ran away. They died before the fun was over. Seeking a challenge that would last forever, Tuska turned his eyes to the Cadian Gate and the swirling madness of the Eye of Terror. Ignoring the warnings of his weird buzz, Tuska flew his WAAAGH directly into the warp storms. He bypassed the fortress worlds of the Imperium, having no interest in the Hummies, and plunged into the domain of the Chaos Gods. The sheer audacity of the invasion allowed his fleet to penetrate deep into the Immaterium, eventually crash landing on a planet within the realm of Khorne, the Blood God. This was a world where the ground was made of flesh and the rivers ran with boiling blood. For Tuska, it was paradise. He and his boys were immediately set upon by legions of bloodletters, juggernauts, and demon engines. The fighting was catastrophic. Orcs were torn apart by demonic blades, and demons were smashed into ichor by power claws. Tuska himself was a whirlwind of joy, laughing as he battled the greater demons of Khorne. The conflict culminated in a duel between Tuska and a demon prince known as the Blood Prince. The prince finally managed to crush Tuska, ending the WAAAGH in a sea of gore. However, the story did not end there. Khorne, the god of martial pride and slaughter, had been watching. He had never seen mortals fight with such pure, unconflicted joy. The orcs bore no angst, no scheme, only the desire to crump. Amused and impressed by their ferocity, the blood god revived Tuska and his entire army the next morning. The orcs awoke, their wounds healed, their ammo replenished, and the demons waiting for round 2. Now Tuska Demon Killa lives in a state of eternal bliss. Every day, he leads his WAAAGH out to battle against the infinite legions of Khorne. Every evening, they are slaughtered to the last orc, and every dawn, they rise again to do it all over. He has achieved the ultimate orc dream, a fight that never ends against an enemy that never runs out, in a place where peace is a concept that simply does not exist. He is the only mortal in the galaxy who has successfully invaded Hell and decided to stay because he liked the weather. These 4 figures, WAAAGH, the prophet of the future, the beast, the echo of the past, Nazdreg, the master of the present, and Tuska, the eternal warrior, illustrate the multifaceted horror of the orc race. They are not a monolithic horde of mindless beasts. They are a complex biological weapon capable of producing diplomats, tacticians, industrialists, and demigods. They are the ultimate survivors, adapting to every threat the galaxy throws at them and responding with a laughter that shakes the stars. As the 41st millennium draws to a close and the Great Rift tears the galaxy in half, the orcs do not look up in fear. They look up in anticipation, for in the darkness, they see only new opportunities for war. The history of the Imperium is written in the blood of martyrs, but the history of the orc is written in the ashes of the civilizations they have burned. While the daily raids and minor incursions of the Greenskins are a constant background radiation of violence across the galaxy, there are moments when the WAAAGH energy reaches a critical mass, coalescing into conflicts so catastrophic they threaten to extinguish the light of humanity entirely. These are not mere battles for territory. They are existential crises that force the Imperium to adapt or die. Perhaps the most harrowing of these conflicts, and certainly the one that came closest to ending the rule of the High Lords of Terra, occurred in the 32nd millennium, a period now known as the War of the Beast. Following the Horus Heresy and the scouring of the traitor legions, the Imperium had slipped into a stagnation born of arrogance. The Great Crusade was over, the traitors were banished to the Eye of Terror, and the orcs were dismissed as a broken, nuisance species, scavengers picking at the fringes of the void. This complacency was shattered when the Beast, a prime orc of terrifying power and intellect, launched a campaign that revealed the true, dormant potential of the greenskin race. The War of the Beast was not a disorganized rampage. It was a coordinated, multi-sector assault launched by an orc civilization that had reached a level of technological sophistication not seen since the War in Heaven. The opening moves of the war saw the annihilation of the Imperial Fists chapter on the planet Ardemantua. The Sons of Dorn were not overwhelmed by numbers alone, but by a grav weapon technology that crushed their power armor like tin. Of the entire chapter, only a single battle brother, Corland, survived the slaughter to carry the warning back to Terra. The weapon of choice for the beast's forces was the attack moon. These were not merely ships, but planetoids that had been hollowed out, heavily armored, and fitted with engines of colossal magnitude. When an attack moon materialized out of the warp in the skies above Terra, it caused a panic not felt since the days of Horus. The moon's gravity wells caused tidal upheavals on the throne world, wrecking orbital plates and causing hive spires to collapse. The High Lords, paralyzed by fear and political infighting, were helpless as the Greenskins broadcast a demand for surrender, not in guttural grunts, but in flawless, aristocratic High Gothic. The Ork ambassador who delivered this message stood face to face with the High Lords, mocking their weakness and exposing the rot at the core of the imperial government. This was the horror of the beast. He was not a savage. He was a conqueror who understood politics as well as he understood slaughter. The desperation of the Imperium during this conflict led to the infamous Proletarian Crusade. In a fit of madness, the ecclesiarchy mobilized the population of Terra, arming billions of untrained citizens with industrial tools and scrap weapons, and launched them in a futile boarding action against the attack moon. The result was a massacre of industrial scale. The Orks did not even bother to shoot. They simply butchered the human waves in close quarters, turning the interior of the moon into a slaughterhouse of unimaginable proportions. The conflict required the resurrection of ancient institutions to resolve. Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders, returned from his wanderings to lead the fight, engaging the beast in personal combat. Yet even a Primarch found himself matched by the sheer physical power of the Prime Ork. The beast stood 10 meters tall, encased in armor that rivaled the protection of a Titan, and wielded the WAAAGH energy with a potency that could destabilize reality. It was only through the formation of the Death Watch by the survivor Corland that the tide began to turn. Corland realized that standard Astartes tactics were insufficient against an enemy that evolved so rapidly. He gathered veterans from various chapters, painting their armor black and training them in specialized Xenos hunting doctrines. This marked the genesis of the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Xenos, a legacy forged in the fires of the beast's WAAAGH. The war ended only after a strike team infiltrated the beast's throne room on Ulanor, utilizing the psychic null field of the Sisters of Silence to dampen the WAAAGH energy, allowing the beast to be slain. The cost was the near total destruction of the Imperial Fists, and a grim reminder that the Orks are never truly defeated, only waiting for a leader strong enough to unlock their genetic destiny. While the War of the Beast showcased the Ork potential for empire building, the assault on Rin's world in the 41st millennium exemplified the sheer, destructive malice of the race. Rin's world was the homeworld of the Crimson Fists, a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists. The invasion was led by Snagrod, the arch-arsonist of Cheredin, a warboss of immense cruelty who had united the disparate tribes of the Loki sector. Snagrod did not just want to conquer, he wanted to humiliate the Space Marines. The tragedy of Rin's world began with a catastrophe that remains a black mark on the chapter's history. As Snagrod's fleet filled the skies, the Crimson Fist's fortress monastery, the Arx Tyrannus, activated its defense batteries. Due to a malfunction, likely caused by the intense interference of the Ork force fields or perhaps sabotage, a single plasma missile fired by the defenses went rogue. It looped back and struck the chapter's primary void missile silo. The resulting explosion was tectonic. The Arx Tyrannus, a fortress that had stood for millennia, was vaporized in an instant. Hundreds of battle brothers, the chapter master, and the gene seed vaults were buried under megatons of rock and ceramite. What followed was a desperate survival horror. Chapter Master Pedro Cantor, who had been on the outskirts of the fortress inspecting the defenses, found himself leading a handful of survivors against millions of Orks. The invasion of Rin's world ceased to be a battle for victory and became a battle for existence. The Crimson Fists were reduced to fewer than 100 warriors. For 18 months, Cantor led his brothers through the burning landscape, waging a guerrilla war against Snagrod's forces. The imagery of the conflict is iconic. the deep blue armor of the fists, battered and scorched, standing back to back against a green tide that choked the horizon. The defining moment came at the Battle of the Farm, where Cantor and his exhausted squad held a river crossing against a massive column of orcs to allow refugees to escape to New Rin City. It was a display of stubborn defiance that defines the Sons of Dorne. Though Rin's world was eventually reclaimed, the chapter was decimated, serving as a brutal lesson in the fragility of even the mightiest Astartes strongholds when faced with the unpredictable chaos of a WAAAGH. Yet, for sheer scale and attrition, no conflict in the 41st millennium compares to the wars for Armageddon. This industrial hive world, vital for the production of chimeras and Leman Russ tanks, has become the anvil upon which the greatest rivalry in the galaxy is hammered out. The Second War for Armageddon began with the arrival of Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. The planetary governor, Hermann von Strab, was a man of colossal incompetence and arrogance, dismissing the initial reports of Ork landings as mere raids. By the time he mobilized the planetary defense forces, it was too late. Ghazghkull had already landed his Gargants. The war devolved into a brutal siege of the hives. The defense was rallied not by the governor, but by Commissar Sebastian Yarrick. Yarrick understood the Ork mind better than any living human. He knew that Orks respect strength and fear nothing but a bigger predator. When he lost his arm to a warboss's power claw, he did not retire. He cut the claw off the dead orc and had it surgically attached to his own shoulder. When rumors spread among the superstitious greenskins that Yarrick could kill with a glance, he had his lost eye replaced with a bionic implant that fired a laser pulse, the Bale Eye. He became a boogeyman to the Orks, a figure of terror and respect. The defense of Hades' hive by Yarrick is legendary. For months, the defenders held out against overwhelming odds, bleeding Ghazghkull's forces white. The war was eventually turned by the arrival of the Blood Angels, Ultramarines, and Salamanders, but the tactical withdrawal of Ghazghkull was the most dangerous moment. The warboss realized that he could not win quickly, so he left. He abandoned his army to their fate, escaping into the void to learn from his mistakes. Yarrick, knowing the beast would return, spent the next 50 years hunting him, but Ghazghkull was always one step ahead, growing larger and smarter. When Ghazghkull returned for the Third War for Armageddon, precisely 50 years later, he brought a force that eclipsed the previous invasion. This was not a war of conquest, it was a war of perfection. Ghazghkull had turned the entire Armageddon sector into a training ground. He smashed asteroids into the planet's surface to create beachheads. He fielded new technologies, including submersible Ork submersibles that attacked the hives from the toxic oceans. The fire wastes became a graveyard of millions. The Third War saw the largest concentration of military force since the Horus Heresy. The Black Templars, led by High Marshal Helbrecht, engaged the Ork fleets in the void. Chaplain Gree Maldus led the defense of Helsreach, a siege immortalized in the annals of the Adeptus Astartes. Yet the war has no end. Armageddon has become a meat grinder, a perpetual conflict that draws Orks from across the galaxy who want to fight in the big one. Ghazghkull eventually left the system again, leaving the war on autopilot, satisfied that he had created a perfect engine of violence that would occupy the Imperium for centuries while he pursued his greater destiny. While Armageddon represents the stalemate of trench warfare, the Octarius War represents a strategic gamble that spiraled into a biological cataclysm. This conflict was born from the desperation of Inquisitor Kryptman. Faced with the unstoppable advance of Hive Fleet Leviathan, Kryptman realized the Imperium did not have the military strength to halt the Tyranids. He devised a radical and heretical plan. If he could not defeat the Tyranids, he would feed them to something else. Kryptman ordered the evacuation of worlds in the Leviathan's path and then subjected them to exterminatus, creating a galactic firebreak of dead worlds to starve the fleet. He then captured a brood of genestealers and placed them in a stasis-shielded vessel, launching it into the heart of the Ork Empire of Octarius. The Empire was ruled by the Overfiend of Octarius, a warlord of immense power controlling a domain that spanned nearly a sector. The genestealers infected the local populace, the psychic beacon of the hive mind was lit, and Leviathan turned aside, crashing directly into the Ork Empire. Kryptman's hope was that the two Xenos races would annihilate each other. He was wrong. Instead of mutual destruction, the war acted as a super-evolutionary accelerant for both species. The Orks, thriving on conflict, found the Tyranids to be the perfect enemy. The bugs never ran away, they never surrendered, and there were always more of them. The fighting was constant, close quarters, and brutal. As a result, the Orks in the Octarius sector began to grow larger and stronger at an unprecedented rate. The WAAAGH energy saturated the sector, drawing in millions of greenskins from nearby systems. Conversely, the Tyranids found a feast of high-quality biomass. Ork DNA is robust and adaptable. Every Ork devoured fed the hive fleet with genetic material that was hardy and aggressive. The war escalated into a stalemate of horrors. On the ground, tides of gaunts clashed with mobs of boys in seas of gore. In the skies, bio-titans wrestled with Ork gargants. The overfiend of Octarius himself engaged the Swarmlord in single combat, a duel of apex predators that shook the bedrock of the capital world. The Octarius War has now breached critical mass. The cordon established by the Imperium to contain the conflict has shattered. The victor of this war will not be a weakened survivor, but a super predator honed by years of the most intense natural selection imaginable. If the Tyranids win, they will emerge with the biomass of an entire Ork Empire. If the Orks win, they will emerge as a WAAAGH of Krork-sized veterans, led by warlords who have killed bio-gods. The gamble has failed, and the galaxy holds its breath as the shockwaves of Octarius begin to spill outward. These conflicts, the beast's political dominance, Snagrod's spiteful destruction, Gozkul's eternal war, and the biological crucible of Octarius, demonstrate that the Ork menace is not static. It is reactive. The harder the galaxy strikes at the greenskin, the stronger the greenskin becomes. They are the mirror of the 41st millennium's violence, reflecting every atrocity back at their enemies with a toothy, tusked grin. Every victory against them is temporary, merely pruning the weed so that it grows back thicker, tougher, and infinitely more dangerous. If the land battles of the 41st millennium are a testament to the Orks' biological supremacy, their presence in the void is a testament to their terrifying ingenuity and their utter disregard for the laws of physics. To the lords of the Imperial Navy, space travel is a sacred science, a perilous endeavor governed by the Navis Nobilis, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the light of the Astronomicon. Ships are cathedral fortresses, built according to standard template construct patterns that have existed for 10,000 years. To the Eldari, the void is a sea to be sailed with solar winds and webway gates, utilizing grace and stealth. To the Ork, the void is simply a gap between fights that needs to be crossed, and the method of crossing it is irrelevant as long as it is loud, fast, and heavily armed. The foundation of Ork stellar expansion is not the shipyard, but the scrapyard. While they are capable of constructing starships from raw materials, the sheer industrial output required to build a void-capable vessel from scratch is often boring to a race that craves immediate gratification. Consequently, the most fearsome vessels in the Ork Armada are not built. They are found, conquered, and repurposed. Foremost among these are the space hulks. These are not ships in the conventional sense, but drifting, nightmarish agglomerations of lost vessels, asteroids, ice, and wreckage that have been fused together by the crushing tides of the warp. A space hulk might contain the crushed remains of an Imperial cruiser from the dark age of technology, the shattered spine of an Eldar Wraith ship, and the jagged hull of a Traitor Legion strike cruiser, all welded together by the unnatural heat of the Empyrean and the passage of millennia. They are often the size of small moon's continents, boasting their own gravity wells and atmospheres. To the Imperium, a space hulk is a curse, a harbinger of genestealer infestations or chaos corruption that must be destroyed with torpedoes from extreme range. To an Ork, a space hulk is a free ride and a fortress combined. When a space hulk drifts out of the warp near an Ork Empire, it triggers a frenzy of activity. Mech boys and their crews launch boarding torpedoes and shuttles to claim the behemoth. Once aboard, they do not attempt to separate the fused ships, they simply inhabit the structure. They restart ancient plasma drives that have been cold for centuries, often bypassing safety protocols with copper wire and sheer optimism. They bolt massive maneuvering thrusters onto the exterior, turning a drifting graveyard into a steerable, albeit sluggish, invasion arc. The interior becomes a sprawling, metallic ecosystem. The vast, cavernous cargo holds are converted into fungus farms and squig pens. The twisting corridors become the territories of different clans. A space hulk can transport hundreds of millions of orks, along with millions of tons of looted armor and gargants, across the galaxy. The resilience of a space hulk is its primary tactical advantage. Void shields are often unnecessary because the hull is kilometers thick. An Imperial Nova cannon might blow a crater the size of a city into the side of a space hulk, but to the orks living inside, that just opens up a new window or clears space for a new landing bay. The decentralized nature of the vessel means there is no single bridge to destroy, no single reactor to overload. You can blow off a third of the mass, and the remaining two-thirds will keep coming, driven by the redundancy of 1,000 different engines fired by 1,000 different mechs. However, space hulks are rare prizes. For the day-to-day business of the WAAAGH, the orks rely on rocks. This is the ultimate expression of ork utilitarianism. A rock is exactly what the name implies, a large asteroid that has been hollowed out and fitted with drives, guns, and life support. The logic is impeccably Orkide. Why build a hull when the universe is full of floating rocks that are already armored? Mech boys will capture a suitable asteroid, bore tunnels through it using laser cutters and enslaved labor, and then strap enormous, crude engines to the rear. The surface is then studded with gun emplacements, torpedo tubes, and shield generators. Rocks are incapable of atmospheric flight and are essentially immobile in a tactical sense. They drift towards the enemy and rely on their inertia. However, their structural integrity is absolute. They are mountains in space. When a WAAAGH descends on a system, the rocks act as drop pods on a planetary scale. They do not enter orbit, they crash land. The impact decimates the local geography, causing earthquakes and dust clouds that choke the defenders. Once the dust settles, the ship becomes a fortress. The guns that were firing into the void are now artillery batteries, and the crew spills out to begin the ground war. It is a one-way trip, but for an ork, the only destination is the battlefield, so a return ticket is unnecessary. While rocks are crude, the attack moon represents the terrifying zenith of greenskin void engineering, a concept that dates back to the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium. These were not merely hollowed asteroids, but planetoids that had been terraformed into fully mechanized battle stations. An attack moon possesses a level of technological sophistication that rivals the craft worlds of the Eldari or the phalanx of the Imperial Fists. During the Beast's campaign, these moons were capable of subspace jumps with pinpoint accuracy, appearing directly in the orbit of Terra. The primary armament of an attack moon is a gravity manipulation weapon of colossal scale. These grav whips can manipulate the tidal forces of a planet, causing crustal destabilization, massive tsunamis, and atmospheric venting. In void combat, they can crush an Imperial battleship into a sphere of super-dense metal with a single pulse. The attack moon also serves as a carrier for millions of attack craft and teleporter, arrays capable of beaming entire armies onto the surface of a target world. While the technology to build attack moons on the scale of the Beast's WAAAGH has largely been lost or fragmented among the mech boys of the 41st millennium, the genetic memory remains. Occasionally, a particularly powerful warboss or big mech will attempt to construct a Death Star equivalent, though usually on a smaller scale, resulting in the feared battle cruisers that form the flagships of modern ork fleets. The propulsion and navigation of these fleets defy all Imperial understanding of the immaterium. For humanity, warp travel is a nightmare. To traverse the warp, an Imperial ship requires a Geller field to create a bubble of reality, protecting the crew from the demons outside. It requires a navigator, a mutant with the third eye capable of seeing the light of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon generated by the Emperor on Terra. Without these, a ship is lost instantly, consumed by the entities of the warp. Orks possess neither Geller fields nor navigators. Instead, they rely on the WAAAGH field and the erratic talents of the Weird Boys. Ork ships are often adorned with massive, grotesque figureheads and glyphed armor plates. These are not merely decorative. The collective belief of the ork crew that these totems ward off demons and nasties actually generates a low-level psychic shield. It is not as hermetic as a Geller field. Demons frequently leak onto ork ships during transit, but this is viewed as a feature, not a bug. A demon incursion in the mess hall is just an opportunity for mid-flight target practice. It keeps the boys sharp during the long journey. Navigation is the province of the Warfed, a weird boy who has become addicted to the taste of the Empyrean. Lacking the ability to see the astronomicon, the warfed navigates by instinct and feel. They can sense the psychic resonance of conflict. A massive war in a neighboring sector acts like a beacon to them, a scent of blood in the water. The warfed guides the ship by screaming directions at the helmsman, steering the vessel through the currents of the warp towards the loudest fight. This method is notoriously unreliable. An Ork fleet might jump into the warp intending to travel to a neighboring system, only to emerge 500 years in the past, or on the other side of the galaxy, or sometimes inside a star. To the Ork, this is acceptable. If they arrive at the battle, good. If they arrive somewhere else, they will just fight whoever is there. If they die in the warp, they get to fight demons for eternity. The lack of fear regarding the destination makes their strategic movements impossible to predict. Imperial admirals often despair when trying to intercept Ork fleets because the Orks themselves do not know where they are going until they get there. Furthermore, Ork ships utilize short jumps. Unlike Imperial vessels that can undertake long voyages through the deep warp, Ork drives are often unstable. They skip across the surface of the immaterium like a stone on a pond. They dive in, travel for a few days, and erupt back into real space to cool down their engines. This skip-drive method means an Orkwah leaves a trail of devastation in its wake. Every system they drop out of to cool down becomes a target of opportunity. They raid orbital stations, board merchant vessels, and scavenge supplies before jumping again. This creates a corridor of destruction that leads directly to the main war zone. Once the fleet arrives at the target, the tactics of Ork void warfare are revealed to be as brutal as their ground combat. The Imperial Navy fights with the discipline of the Age of Sail, broadside duels, overlapping fields of fire, and long-range lance strikes. They prioritize keeping the enemy at a distance to utilize their superior targeting cogitators. Orks view this as cowardice. Ork naval doctrine is summarized in 2 words: ramming speed. Ork ships are designed for collision. The prow of an Ork kill cruiser is a massive, reinforced beak of solid adamantium, often shaped like a jagged jaw or a fist. The engines are oversized, venting raw plasma to achieve sudden bursts of acceleration. In battle, an Ork captain does not flank, he charges. He orders the boilers stoked to critical levels, ignoring the red warning lights, and drives his ship directly at the largest enemy vessel he can see. The goal is not just to smash the enemy ship, but to board it. Void combat is impersonal. Pressing a button to fire a macro cannon lacks the visceral satisfaction of hitting someone with a choppa. Therefore, Ork ships are filled with boarding torpedoes. These are essentially armored cans with rockets on the back. They have no guidance systems, no braking thrusters, and no safety harnesses. They are fired in clouds at the enemy. Those that miss drift off into the void. Those that hit smash through the hull of the enemy ship, the nose cones crumpling to absorb the impact. The doors blow open, and a mob of screaming greenskins spills into the corridors of the Imperial vessel. Because Orks excel in close-quarters combat, a successful boarding action is almost always a death sentence for the defending ship. A single mob of knobs can slaughter the armsmen of an entire deck. The fighting spreads like a virus. Orks loot as they kill, tearing panels off the walls and ripping heavy stubbers from their mounts to use against the crew. If the ship is taken, it is not scuttled, it is looted. The Orks enslave the surviving crew to run the complex stations and weld metal plates over the Imperial Aquillas. Within weeks, the majestic lunar-class cruiser is covered in graffiti, bolted on armor, and extra engines, reborn as a looted cruiser ready to turn its guns on its former masters. For long-range engagement, Orks rely on volume of fire over accuracy. Their ships are bristling with guns. Unlike the standardized batteries of the Imperium, Ork broadsides are a chaotic mix of scavenged weaponry. A single battery might contain a macro cannon, a looted Eldar pulsar, a railgun from a Tau ship, and a massive, custom-built smash-a-gun that fires balls of compressed scrap metal. The targeting systems are non-existent. Gretchen crews simply load and fire as fast as they can. The philosophy is that if you fill space with enough metal, the enemy ship will eventually run into it. The smash-a-gun and the tractor cannon are unique to Ork void engineering. The tractor cannon projects a localized force beam that latches onto an enemy ship. It does not cause damage directly. Instead, it drags the enemy vessel towards the Ork ship, preventing escape and pulling them into range of the boarding claws. It is the harpoon of the space lanes. The psychological effect of a sleek Imperial frigate struggling against an invisible grip, while a massive, rusty Ork terror ship reels it in, is profound. Ork fleets also deploy vast clouds of attack craft. Fighter bombers are void-capable versions of their atmospheric aircraft. They are crude, leaking atmosphere and fuel, but they are fast and incredibly durable. Ork pilots fly with a suicidal disregard for their own safety, weaving through point defense fire to deliver payloads of Bernie rockets directly into the engine exhaust ports of enemy capital ships. They are often launched from attack hangars, which are just holes blown in the side of the Ork ship with force fields over them to keep the air in. The hierarchy of an Ork fleet mirrors that of the land army. The largest ship belongs to the warlord or the admiral. The bigger the ship, the more authority it projects. Internal discipline is maintained by the captain spacing mutinous crew members out of the airlock. Life aboard an Ork vessel is squalid and dangerous. The air scrubbers barely work, leaving the atmosphere thick with the smell of fungus, oil, and unwashed bodies. Radiation leaks are common, leading to high rates of mutation, or getting weird, among the crew. Gravity plating is often spotty, meaning some decks have standard gravity, some have low gravity, and some might be upside down, requiring the crew to walk on the ceiling. Despite these deficiencies, the Ork fleet is a juggernaut. It does not require supply lines. It does not need a space dock for repairs. Mech boys conduct repairs during battle, welding hull breaches shut from the inside while the ship is taking fire. If a ship runs out of fuel, they raid a gas giant or board a tanker. If they run out of ammo, they fire garbage, asteroids, or even Gretchen out of the torpedo tubes. The teleport attack is the final ace in the Ork void arsenal. While Imperial Terminators use teleportation with caution, Ork big mechs weaponize it recklessly. The teleporter arrays on a battleship-class Ork vessel can beam entire mobs of meganobs or even a def dread directly onto the bridge of an enemy flagship. The shields of the enemy vessel usually block teleportation, but Orks have a workaround. They ram the ship first. Once the shields are collapsed by the physical impact, the teleporters activate. The sudden appearance of 3 tons of armored Ork inside the command sanctum of a Lord Admiral ends the naval engagement instantly. The aesthetics of the fleet vary by clan, just like their ground forces. A Bad Moon fleet is a dazzling display of wealth. Their ships are plated in gold and yellow, armed with the most expensive, high-tech energy weapons money can buy. They favor flash gits, boarding parties, and often possess the most reliable engines. An Evil Sun's fleet is painted red, obviously. Their ships are stripped of heavy armor to reduce mass, fitted with oversized thrusters, and act as fast raiders. They are the first to close the distance, deploying interceptors and boarding torpedoes before the enemy can bring their main guns to bear. Deathskull fleets are essentially floating salvage yards. They tractor beam wreckage during the battle itself, stripping destroyed ships for parts while the fight is still raging. Their ships are blue, lucky, and held together by stolen tech. It is not uncommon to see a Deathskull cruiser utilizing a stolen Necron drive system that they activated by hitting it with a hammer until it hummed. Goth fleets are grim, black leviathans. They disdain fancy energy weapons and complex maneuvers. Their ships are built like battering rams, heavily armored, and designed solely for the purpose of smashing into the enemy line to deliver the maximum number of boys into melee combat. The freebooters deserve special mention in the context of void warfare. These outcast pirates are the only Orks who truly live for the void. Led by captains like Badruk, they treat their ships with a level of affection rare among greenskins. A freebooter ship is often a custom job, bristling with trophy racks, jolly Ork flags, and looted luxury items. They are mercenaries, selling their naval support to land-bound warbosses in exchange for a share of the planetary loot. Freebooter fleets are often the most experienced in void combat, utilizing actual tactics like flanking and feints, largely because they want to preserve their ships to plunder another day. When a WAAAGH goes interstellar, it forms a void armada. This is not a formation, it is a migration. At the center are the rocks and the space hulks, the slow-moving castles carrying the bulk of the population. Surrounding them are the kill cruisers and terror ships, the wolves protecting the herd, and buzzing around the edges are millions of fighter bombers and escort craft. The sheer psychic weight of this armada calms the warp around it, creating a slipstream that pulls the ships forward. They do not communicate with coded bursts. They flood the Vox channels with war cries, heavy metal noise, and insults, creating a wall of electronic warfare that jams enemy sensors through sheer volume of sound. To face an Ork fleet is to face a natural disaster. There is no cutting the head off the snake, for every ship is an independent entity of violence. There is no outmaneuvering them, for they will simply turn and ram you. There is no reasoning with them. The green void is not empty. It is full of rust, fire, and the laughter of a billion souls who look at the cold, airless vacuum of space and see only another road to the next battle. The opening of the Great Rift, known to the Imperium as the Cicatrix Maledictum, marked a cataclysmic shift in the stellar geography of the 41st millennium. For the servants of the Emperor, it was the death knell of hope, a tear in reality that split the domain of humanity in two and bathed half the galaxy in the maddening light of the warp. For the Eldari, it was the manifestation of their ancient failures, a resurgence of the primordial annihilator. For the Tiao, it was a confusing, illogical anomaly that defied their understanding of science. But for the Orks, the splitting of the sky was the greatest thing to happen in 60 million years. To the Greenskin mind, the Great Rift is not a disaster, it is a delivery system. Prior to the emergence of the rift following the fall of Cadia, Orks had to travel weeks or months through the warp to find a good fight, relying on the erratic navigation of their weird boys. Now, the fight has come to them. The rift bleeds raw Empyrean energy into real space, and with it come the legions of the Chaos Gods. Demonic incursions, which terrify the disciplined soldiers of the Astra Militarum and drive planetary governors to suicide, are viewed by Orks as bonus rounds. A demon is a perfect enemy for an Ork. It does not run away, it usually fights in melee, and there is an infinite supply of them. This influx of warp energy has had a profound, stimulating effect on the Orkoid physiology across the galaxy. As established, Orks are a reactive species. They grow larger and more aggressive in response to conflict and psychic pressure. The Cicatrix Maledictum acts as a massive amplifier for the WAAAGH energy. In systems bordering the rift, Imperial listening posts have reported a statistically impossible increase in the size of Ork combatants. Boys are emerging from the fighting pits with the muscle mass of knobs, and knobs are swelling to the size of warbosses within mere months of campaigning against Khornate Berserkers or Nurgle's Rot legions. The ambient psychic radiation of the galaxy has been cranked up, and the Orks are feeding on it like algae in a sunlit pond. This escalation is not merely physical, it is logistical. The warp storms that make travel impossible for the Imperium, blinding navigators and scattering fleets, are less of a hindrance to Ork vessels. Because Ork navigation relies on the instinctive, brute force psychic thrust of the WAAAGH, rather than the delicate sighting of the astronomic and greenskin fleets, are often the only ships capable of traversing the darker reaches of the Imperium Nihilus. They ride the turbulence of the warp storms, using the currents of madness to propel their space hulks and rocks deep into undefended human territory. The Great Rift has effectively removed the borders that contain the Ork empires, allowing them to spill out into sectors that have not seen a greenskin invasion in thousands of years. At the center of this revitalized aggression stands Gaz-Kul-Mag Uruk-Thraka, the prophet of the WAAAGH. His trajectory has shifted from that of a sector-level warlord to a galactic threat of theological proportions. In the wake of his defeats and victories at Armageddon, and his subsequent death and resurrection at the hands of Mad Doc Grotznik and the space wolf Ragnar Blackmane, Gaz-Kul has undergone a metamorphosis. He is no longer simply gathering a massive army to crush a specific world, he is building a network. Utilizing the advanced teleportation technology refined by his personal mechboy genius, Orkheims, Gaz-Kul is hopping across the galaxy, appearing in war zones to bully local warbosses into submission, unite disparate clans, and then vanishing to repeat the process elsewhere. This is a fundamental change in Ork behavior. Historically, WAAAGHs are localized events that burn out once they run out of momentum or enemies. Gaz-Kul is creating a great WAAAGH that has no single destination. He is weaving the millions of isolated Ork empires into a single, cohesive consciousness. By enforcing his will upon the wildest and most powerful warbosses, he is synchronizing the psychic frequency of the greenskin race. He preaches a vision given to him by Gork and Mork, a galaxy of eternal war, where the Orks are united not just by opportunity, but by divine purpose. His massive flagship, De Maikari, serves as the mobile capital of this new order, a vessel that is part battleship, part temple, and part broadcasting station for the Prophet's roar. The implications of this unification are terrifying when viewed through the lens of the critical mass theory held by the Ordo Xenos. Imperial scholars have long theorized that the Ork race possesses a dormant genetic trigger. The evidence suggests that the Orks of the 41st millennium are a devolved, feral state of the species, stripped of their true potential by millions of years of infighting and lack of a sufficient threat. The Krork of the War in Heaven were not just big beasts. They were sophisticated super soldiers clad in power armor more advanced than the Adeptus Astartes, wielding weapons that could shatter stars. The theory posits that if the Ork population reaches a certain density, and the level of conflict reaches a certain intensity, the species will instinctively begin to evolve back toward this ancestral state. We are now seeing the early warning signs of this evolution. The appearance of prime Orks during the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium was a precursor, but the current galactic environment is even more conducive to this change. The return of the demon primarchs, the awakening of the Necron Silent King, and the invasion of the Tyrannid hive fleets have provided the predatory pressure required to activate the Krork genes. In the Octarius sector, where Orks fought Tyrannids in a meat grinder for years, the survivors did not just get bigger, they got smarter. Reports from the cordon, before it collapsed, indicated Orks utilizing standardized tactics, disciplined firing lines, and manufacturing weapons with standardized calibers, behaviors that are anathema to the anarchic modern Ork. If Ghazghkull succeeds in uniting the clans on a galactic scale, the WAAAGH field generated by quadrillions of Orks screaming in unison could trigger a species-wide rapid evolution. We are not talking about a few large warbosses. We are talking about the rank and file boys growing to the height of space marines, possessing the intellect to understand complex logistics and the innate technical knowledge to build gravity whips and attack moons within weeks. The crude, rusted scrap tech of the mech boys would be replaced by the sleek, devastatingly efficient technology of the Krork. The beast would no longer be a barbarian at the gate, but a superior soldier standing on the ruins of the gate he just dismantled with a look of bored efficiency. This potential return of the Krork is the nightmare scenario that keeps the High Lords of Terra awake. The Imperium's strategic assessment of the Ork threat has always been mitigated by the Greenskins' fractured nature. The Administratum classifies Orks as a manageable catastrophe because, left to their own devices, they will kill each other. A warboss spends 90% of his time suppressing rivals and only 10% fighting the enemy. This internal friction is the only thing that has prevented the Orks from overrunning the galaxy 10,000 years ago. However, the math changes instantly if that friction is removed. There are more Orks in the galaxy than there are humans. They infest almost every sector, thriving in environments that would kill a guardsman in minutes. They reproduce via spores, meaning every world they have ever fought on is a potential recruitment world. If Ghazghkull, or the pressures of the Great Rift, can direct this aggression outward simultaneously, the Imperium cannot stand against it. Simulations run by the Logis Strategos of the Adeptus Terra predict that a fully united Ork WAAAGH would overwhelm the Segmentum Solar in less than a standard Terran year. The Astra Militarum relies on attrition and logistics. Orks ignore logistics and thrive on attrition. The Adeptus Astartes rely on surgical strikes to decapitate enemy leadership. Killing an Ork leader just makes the next biggest Ork take charge, often one who is younger, stronger, and more eager to prove himself. The Tyrannids consume biomass, but Orks are a fungus that fights back, and the resulting war of attrition only feeds the Ork growth cycle. Even the Necrons, the ancient enemies of the Krork, would find themselves outnumbered by a foe designed specifically by the Old Ones to dismantle their dynasties. The technological acceleration observed in recent conflicts supports this dire forecast. In the 32nd millennium, the Beast's forces teleported moons across the galaxy. Today, we see big mechs experimenting with subspace pockets and weaponized wormholes. The chaotic slapdash nature of Ork tech is beginning to crystallize into something more consistent. The shock attack gun, once a rare curiosity, is becoming standard issue in heavy weapons teams. Gargants are being constructed with void shielding that rivals the protection of Imperial Titans. The genetic memory is unlocking. The mech boys are remembering how to build the weapons that once fought gods. Furthermore, the spiritual dimension of the Ork threat renders them immune to the psychological warfare that the Imperium uses to maintain order. The tyranny of the ecclesiarchy and the fear of the Inquisition hold humanity together. The Orks are held together by joy. They are the only race in the galaxy that is genuinely happy with the state of affairs. The Great Rift is not a scar, it is a party. The Tyranids are not a plague, they are a buffet of violence. The Necrons are not ancient horrors, they are shiny scrap waiting to be looted. You cannot demoralize an enemy that views its own casualties as hilarious and your resistance as the best part of their day. This psychological immunity extends to the threat of chaos. While humanity fights a constant battle for its soul, the Ork soul is secure in the Great Green. Khorne may rage, but Orks just see him as a big, angry git. Nurgle's plagues might rot their flesh, but Ork physiology is so robust they often just shrug it off or replace the rotting limb with a bionic one. Slaanesh has nothing to offer a race that has no desire for excess beyond Mordaka. Tzeentch's schemes fall apart against a species that does not plan, but simply acts. The Orks are the anti-chaos, a wall of green noise that screams over the whispers of the dark gods. As the 41st millennium bleeds into the 42nd, the galaxy stands on a precipice. The Indomitus Crusade fights to reclaim the stars for humanity, but they are fighting to retake a galaxy that is rapidly becoming property of the Orks. The Greenskins are no longer just raiders or pirates. They are an empire in ascendance, fueled by the very chaos that seeks to destroy them. They are the endless tide, the biological inevitable. The tragedy of the Eldar is that they are a dying race, raging against the night. The tragedy of the Imperium is that it is a rotting corpse, sustained by momentum and sacrifice. The Orks have no tragedy. They have one. The galaxy is at war, and for an Ork, that is paradise. Whether they evolve back into the Krork and conquer the stars with high technology, or whether they simply drown the universe in a tide of choppas and crude iron, the result is the same. The future is not grim, nor is it dark. It is green. And it is screaming wah with a billion throats, a sound that will echo until the last star burns out.